Good morning, everyone. We're waiting for participants to be able to get into the meeting space, and we will get started in just a couple of minutes.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the kickoff workshop for the fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan for clean transportation incentives. My name is Graciela Garcia, and I'm the lead staff over the funding plan. I'm joined today by Lisa McCumber, manager over the funding plan, as well as the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project and Financing Assistance for Low-Income Consumers program, and our wonderful team who will also be presenting today. Before we get started, I want to go over some logistics for today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We anticipate a copy of the recording will be made available on the Low Carbon Transportation Investments and Air Quality Improvement Program Meetings and Workshops webpage in approximately 2 weeks. Materials for today's work group, including the agenda and slides, are available on the same web page, and a link to these materials will be dropped into the Zoom chat. In addition, we'll be leveraging Zoom's raised hand and Q&A box features to facilitate comments and questions. If you'd like to submit comments or questions in writing, please use the Zoom Q&A feature, and we will address policy-related questions verbally for the benefit of all attendees. If there are Zoom disruptions for any reason, including malicious intent, we will immediately end today's meeting and send out another notice to reschedule. And lastly, we're unable to allow anonymous meeting participants for security reasons. Please be sure to make sure your name is clear on the Zoom platform. If you have called in, we will adjust your phone number and call you if your raised hand based on the last 4 digits of your number. So for today's agenda, we will begin with an overview of the Clean Transportation Incentives Funding Plan, how it fits within CARB's broader portfolio of incentives, and then move into a discussion around the governor's proposed budget. After the budget, we will cover several components contained within the scope of the funding plan. We'll first provide an overview on the development of the long-term plan for light-duty vehicles and clean transportation equity investments, followed by a short break. We will then round out the morning session of today's workshop with an update on existing light-duty and clean transportation equity investments, followed by another break. After lunch, we'll provide an overview of CARB's heavy-duty investment strategy, as well as an update on our on-road and off-road heavy-duty vehicle and equipment projects, and cover next steps. Please note, we'll provide time for questions following each portion of today's agenda. So today's presentation on the funding plan focuses on 2 funding sources, low carbon transportation and the Air Quality Improvement Program. The incentive programs we're discussing today are a part of a broader portfolio of funding that CARB administers to improve air quality, enhance community protection, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. CARB strives to maintain a balanced portfolio of available investments to meet the state's air quality and climate goals. While the Community Air Protection Program, Farmer, and the VW Mitigation Trust are not directly tied to today's presentation, but we continue to closely coordinate with these programs to make sure investments are complementary. Each of these programs have their own distinct goals that support the state's broader strategy. We recognize that not every program can fund every worthy technology. However, maintaining integrity of the program goals is essential to ensure that the state achieves both immediate air quality benefits and that it supports the innovative technologies necessary to meet the state's vision of a zero-emission economy. And outside of CARB, other federal, state, and local agencies have complementary funding sources as well. We also coordinate regularly with our sister agencies on these investment programs. The first source of funding included in the funding plan, the Air Quality Improvement Program, or ACQIB, was created by Assembly Bill 118 in 2007 and later reauthorized in 2013 by Assembly Bill 8. ACQIB provided the initial funding to start many of the projects that are now primarily funded from the low carbon transportation and related appropriations. ACQIB guidelines require a board-approved funding plan, which details the priorities and projects to be funded for the year. We use this framework for the cap and trade auction proceeds as well, developing a single plan covering both funding sources to guide our investments. ACQIB focuses on reducing criteria pollutant and diesel particulate emissions with, in many cases, concurrent reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The average annual funding for this program has ranged between 25 to 30 million in recent years. And for the past several budget cycles, we've directed the majority of ACQIB funds to the Truck Loan Assistance Program. ACQIB allocations are based on revenue from vehicle registrations as a part of the smog abatement fee. This year's, the governor's proposed budget includes approximately 29 million for ACQIB. The second source of funding, the Low Carbon Transportation Program, is traditionally funded through cap and trade auction proceeds. These auction proceeds expand on the types of projects we've been funding through ACQIB since 2009. Under state law, the Department of Finance must prepare an investment plan every 3 years, and then funds are appropriated by the legislature to state agencies for greenhouse gas reduction programs in each year's budget. The investment plan looks to low carbon transportation to fund projects that will help meet California's various environmental goals, support benefits to priority populations and communities, and provide the continued investments necessary to transition to a low carbon economy. In addition, it's worthy to note that the administration has doubled down by proposing an additional $10 billion for equitable zero-emission vehicle transportation over the next 5 years for the California Air Resources Board, the Energy Commission, California State Transportation Agency, and the Governor's Office of Economic Business and Development. These investments are intended to focus on equitable zero-emission vehicle transportation by targeting dollars in priority populations, including tribal communities, and includes $3.9 billion approved in last year's budget, also known as the 2021 ZEV package, and $6.1 billion in the governor's January budget proposal for the fiscal year 2022-23. This year's funding plan covers CARB's portion of the ZEV package, which includes approximately $1.28 billion for clean transportation incentives. But it's not just the funding sources that drives how we develop our funding plan. We look to support the strategies and follow the guidance outlined in numerous other documents, such as the SB 350 Low Income Barrier Study and the Mobile Source Strategy. Additionally, the funding plan supports executive orders and legislative mandates, such as the governor's executive orders on zero-emission technologies and the California Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act. This slide illustrates historical appropriations for clean transportation incentives over the last several years. As you can see, this year's appropriation will build on approximately $4 billion that have been invested since 2013. So zeroing in on CARB funding to be covered in this year's funding plan, A total of $296 million is proposed for purchase incentive equity programs, which includes $125 million to expand Clean Cars for All statewide that is carried over from last year's ZEV package. $65 million is proposed for sustainable community-based transportation and mobility equity projects. $280 million is for zero-emission drayage trucks, school buses, and transit buses, which is also the second year of a multi-year effort to significantly increase deployment of vehicles in each of these categories. $600 million is for zero-emission trucks, buses, and off-road equipment, and at least $10 million for emerging opportunities, bringing us to about $1.3 billion proposed for this year's funding plan. In addition, I'd like to note there's also complementary infrastructure funding through the Energy Commission to support zero-emission drayage, transit, school bus deployment appropriation, as well as funding to support critical charging infrastructure. AB 1550 establishes investment minimums for low-income communities and households. Under AB 1550, California climate investments must be minimally allocated as follows: 25% to projects located within the boundaries of and benefiting individuals living in disadvantaged communities, 5% to projects that benefit low-income households or to projects located within the boundaries of and benefiting individuals living in low-income communities anywhere in the state, and 5% to projects that benefit low-income community residents or low-income households within a half-mile of a disadvantaged community. Disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and low-income households are collectively referred to as priority populations. Funding for California climate investments come from cap and trade auction proceeds. The state's portion of the cap and trade auction proceeds are deposited into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF, to be used for California climate investments. The AB 1550 percentage requirements apply to the overall appropriation the legislature makes to the California climate investments rather than to each agency. CARB works with administering agencies to establish individual investment targets for each program to help ensure the overall AB 1550 investment minimums are met within each appropriation. Projects funded by GGRF must provide a direct, meaningful, and assured benefit which addresses a community need in order to count towards the AB 1550 investment minimums. Program-specific targets established for low-carbon transportation exceed the statutory investment minimums. The investment targets for low-carbon transportation for fiscal year 2021-22 are 60% overall to priority populations. In addition to our investment targets, CARB also reports regularly on how investments and programs are progressing. Progress reports are often provided in the form of formal documents and public-facing tools that display program data in various ways. As you'll hear in later presentations, staff continue to define metrics for the projects we fund, collect data from these projects, and find ways to improve upon the way we report outcomes from the investments we make. This year's funding plan will expand on efforts from previous years. As previously noted, one theme will be continuing to refine metrics and a plan to measure and report outcomes of our incentives. This includes refining our plan to evaluate how effective our incentive programs are at generating behavioral change so that we can use this data in the future to improve our incentive programs further. Additionally, we continue to refine our plan to expand metrics used to measure and report socioeconomic benefits of our clean transportation equity projects. And in the heavy-duty sector, we expect to continue to focus on assisting owner-operators and small fleets as they make the transition to zero-emission trucks. Another theme we will continue for this year's funding plan is to further explore different ways how we can incorporate the 6 standards for equitable investment as found in the Greenlining Institute's Greenlined Economy Guidebook and Making Equity Real in Mobility Equity Projects documents. Some of these critical principles were also identified through our SB 350 barriers report. These include prioritizing multi-sector and multidiscipline approaches in our investments, delivering more intentional benefits and minimizing burdens, and being community-driven at every single stage through community inclusion and idea building. One critical lesson we're working to apply is the need to place additional emphasis on measuring progress and benefits beyond greenhouse gas emissions, including developing more standardized or project-specific metrics to track over time. An example of this is our effort to try and understand jobs and other socioeconomic benefits within our existing clean transportation and mobility projects, as well as consider how we design future grant programs to address qualitative data collection at the onset, with the continued goal of measuring progress in a more standardized way and understanding exactly how we are improving quality of life in priority communities as a result of our investments. CARB is also working this year to build upon the SB 350 barriers report recommendations, which noted the need for expanding workforce training and career development opportunities for priority communities. This is not only essential in boosting California's green economy, but also increasing training programs and improving curriculum and providing connections to quality jobs. In June of last year, CARB partnered with the Energy Commission and contributed $1 million for a total of approximately $6.8 million in funding for community-driven ideal ZEV workforce pilot projects. And in November, the board approved an additional $1.5 million for this category as a part of the fiscal year 2021-22 funding plan. And lastly, we will continue to further our state, local, and community resident partnerships, as well as taking critical lessons learned and applying them during development of the funding plan and across our clean transportation and mobility projects. Another key theme for this year's funding plan development specifically is to broaden our inclusion and community engagement efforts across the state. Over the next several months, staff will be meeting with individuals and community groups, not only to obtain feedback, but to provide space for and listen to communities on what matters most to them. Our overarching goals for this general approach is to listen, acknowledge, and address community identified barriers and challenges within the funding plan development and implementation. We hope this engagement will help us find ways to make real and effective change with our projects to ensure that folks that haven't been able to access incentives are able to going forward. In addition to the funding plan, CARB is also working to maximize inclusion and engagement within our individual incentive programs. This goes beyond our light duty applications and includes a desire to provide broader information to community groups as a part of the funding plan process. So with that, I want to note that today's workshop, it's only the start of the process for developing the funding plan. So over the next several months, we will hold numerous work groups for each of our project categories and initiate community and stakeholder engagement. On July 21st, we expect to hold our second workshop. And before this workshop, we will release a draft funding plan that contains greater detail on our preliminary proposals. In October, we release our proposed funding plan, which will be open for public comment, and we will visit the board for consideration in November. With all that said, however, I'd like to note that even though we have our set schedule for work groups, workshops, and engagement, we will continue to have our open door policy and encourage folks to meet with staff at any time. And with that, we're going to open up the floor for a short discussion period and questions for this introductory material. So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the webinar feature to raise your hand. For those using Zoom online, please click on the raised hand option on the Zoom navigation bar under the Participants tab. For those using Zoom on a mobile application, please click on the raised hand option in the More tab. For those who are participating by phone, please be sure to press #2 and we will call on you accordingly. Once your line is open, you can begin to speak. Please state your name and affiliation first before providing a comment or asking a question. You may also type your question into the questions and answers or chat box. We will alternate between taking verbal questions and reading and responding to those in the Q&A box. So I will hand it over to Sean.
All right, it looks like we have a hand raised from Andrew Mercer. Andrew, I'm going to unmute your line and go ahead and unmute. You're able to ask your question.
Andrew, you'll need to unmute on your end as well. We've unmuted you on ours. Okay, let's move on to the next raised hand for now, Sean, and we'll come back to Andrew.
Okay. Our next question is, our comment is from Aiden, and Aiden, go ahead and unmute your line.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. So my name is Aiden Johnson, and I'm here representing a organization called Jobs to Move America. And we try to advocate for public purchasing to create the most public goods. So often that means making sure that all this money that's flowing through in the budget goes to companies that pay workers well, have okay benefits, what we like to call a family sustaining job. So I just wanted to say I appreciated hearing all of this and want to thank you for all of your work so far. It's really great to hear the ways that you're lifting up equity and investing in communities that need it the most. So I just want to thank you for that and encourage conversations about making sure that all of this money also ends up being distributed to manufacturers that have high road policies. Yeah, thanks so much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Aiden.
Okay, let's go back to Andrew. Andrew, you're free to unmute your line.
While we wait for Andrew to see if he unmutes, I will read a question that's in the Q&A and kind of keep an eye on him as well. Question in from Kim Springer. Lots of money for ZEV, etc. I totally support and appreciate California's focus and hope we can get funding for specific counties. Can we get a read on the grid's ability county by county to support this transition? Really, the ask here is for kind of county by county analysis when it comes to needs. Kim, that's a great question, and we can certainly look into that. And I think where it comes down to kind of grid ability, that'd be something we can work with the California Energy Commission to see what they have available. They do have a lot of great tools on their website that you are able to access data and kind of understand generally what the grid needs are, but we'll connect with them as well to see what more we can do to provide more county by county specifics. Let's see, Andrew, are you able to unmute your line yet? Okay, let me read another question that I've got, and then after that, we'll go on to the next raised hand. So a question from Dave Cook: when does the $600 million in GGRF funds get allocated into different programs? For this year's funding, that's what this process is for. So this is the beginning of our funding plan development process, and the funds that are allocated within the governor's budget, whether it's from GGRF, from the general fund, or from the air quality improvement program, we use this process to identify what staff's priorities are for how we're going to spend those dollars, and then we bring our board our recommendations for that funding in November. Okay, Sean, I'll kick it back to you.
All right, we have, let's move to another raised hand, and I'll try and figure out what's going on with Andrew's line here. But for now, we're going to move on to Mark Roast. And Mark, you're free to unmute your line.
Thank you, Sean. I'm Mark Ruiz with Sustainable Energy, Inc., and I'm an advisor with the Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition. And I'm interested in finding out where CARB is relating to the December 31st of this year deadline for the drayage trucks to convert or change to electric or hydrogen. And particularly because in the drayage level, they're actually looking at $30,000 to $50,000 as their ceiling for what they pay for a truck that already has 500,000 miles on it. And then they run it for another 500,000 miles as an older truck. So given that use cycle, it's really makes sense for them to be able to convert their truck from diesel to battery electric, but the schedule of funding appears to be causing, forcing them to pay even more than $30,000 to $50,000 to do that in terms of what's left, the money, the funding, the expenses that are left over after the amount that you would fund. So the two questions are, one, what's happening to that deadline for people who absolutely cannot buy a new truck? And two, how can you make things work for those people that have that low a budget, $30,000 to $50,000 that they are generally trying to spend? And one other point is that the used market, the guy I talked to wants to convert 3 trucks, went to a dealer who said, I have 1 truck for $150,000. So that was totally unfeasible. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark.
Lisa, did you want to take those questions?
Yeah, generally, yeah, thanks, Mark, for the comment. We do have several programs that are available for being able to purchase zero emission trucks and vehicles. When it comes to conversions, as you know, there's room within some of the programs to support conversions. Some of the other programs that we have don't. So it's kind of a mix of things. But as we go out throughout the day and talk about the different programs, I'll encourage you to kind of chime in where you see those opportunities that might fit best for ways that we can maybe tailor a program to fit this type of scenario, so we can have a kind of more robust conversation where it might fit within each of the specific projects. I've got several questions as well that have come in the Q&A box. Let me go through a couple of those real quick. Carlene Cullen, is there funding for infrastructure projects for multifamily properties? So what we'll talk about today is the majority of the funding that we have is primarily for vehicles, although we do, as part of many of our projects, include the infrastructure within that, but we don't do specifically just infrastructure focused projects. The Energy Commission's portion of the funding within the ZEV package and their other funding sources support those more directly. But again, that doesn't mean there aren't opportunities to support multifamily properties. And you will hear a little bit more about that later on as we talk about our mobility options type projects and our STEP program. And then a clarifying question from Christopher Amandano. Is this a timeline to implement projects regarding when funding will be awarded or when applicants will be required to begin project implementation? Great question. I'm not sure exactly which timeline you're referring to. The timeline that Grace presented is our timeline for bringing this funding plan to our board. So that is for determining how we're going to spend the funding that is proposed in this year's budget. Beyond that, there will be a time frame by which we are required to follow in order to get the dollars put into grants and then get the dollars ultimately spent. And so we do have plenty of time kind of post this process for getting those dollars spent and out into projects. We are getting close to needing to wrap up on time. I've got one more question in the Q&A that I will cover for now. And the other questions that are asked, we will get to a little bit later. So don't worry, your question will not get lost. Oh my gosh, I lost it though, because a few jumped in. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand back to you, Sean, for one more comment, and then we'll move on from this portion.
Okay. We have a raised hand from Eric Andrade. Eric, you're free to unmute your line.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you guys for putting this on. I have a question regarding EV trucks. Will there be funds this year for potentially Tulare County? I've
So
looked
that-
in the past, and I haven't really seen anything. Is there an opportunity this year for that?
So that's a great question. And the answer to your question is yes. We encourage you to continue to, as Lisa mentioned, this is really kicking off the process on how we spend this year's funds that's proposed in the governor's budget. So we encourage you to continue to stay engaged with this process to see if we can work with you to get some funds specifically for Tulare County.
Yeah, it's because it seems like it's a lot of the funds are more northern based of California and not much going down south. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been able to access funds for the Sacramento, the Turlock areas, but nothing in regards to Tulare County. Is it by region? Is that how it works?
So it depends on the program. Most of our programs are statewide. However, there are specific programs that are like administered within each of the air districts within the state. So it's kind of a mixed bag. But the majority of these programs are available statewide.
Gotcha.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are out of time for this portion, and I'll hand back to you, Grace, in a moment. Andrew, I know we were unsuccessful in being able to get your comment. If you wouldn't mind just dropping your question or comment into the Q&A box, we'll make sure that your questions and comments are heard.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So we're now going to begin our discussion on the long-term plan for light-duty vehicle and clean transportation equity investments. I'd like to introduce Raquel Leon, who will she'll present first on the light-duty vehicle purchase incentives portion of the long-term plan, and Ashley Giorgio, who will then present on the clean transportation and equity investments portion of the plan. Raquel?
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to start off by covering some background information on the legislative requirements for the long-term plan and what information the plan will include. Senate Bill 1275, which was signed into law in 2014, established a Charge Ahead California initiative with the goals of placing 1 million zero and near zero emission vehicles on California's roads by 2023 in order to establish a self-sustaining market and to increase access to these vehicles for low-income consumers and those in disadvantaged communities. SB 1275 also directed CARB to adopt several changes to CVRP, including establishing income eligibility limits, which first came into effect in March 2016 and were later updated in November of 2016. Finally, SB 1275 required CARB to include a long-term plan for CVRP and related programs in the fiscal year 2016-17 funding plan, and to update it every 3 years through January 1st, 2023. While CARB staff have re-examined funding need forecasts every year since fiscal year 2016-17 in each annual funding plan, this year we are providing the second major update to the long-term plan that will cover the time frame of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2025. As part of the long-term plan, Staff must include a 3-year forecast of funding needs to support the goals of technology advancement, market readiness, and increased consumer acceptance of zero-emission vehicles. The second element of the plan is a market and technology assessment for each vehicle technology to inform the appropriate funding level, incentive type, and incentive amount moving forward. The long-term plan also requires an assessment of when a self-sustaining market is expected and how existing incentives may be modified to reflect changes in future market conditions. In addition, the supplemental report of the 2018-19 Budget Act also requires CARB to update the CVRP forecast annually starting until January 1st, 2030, and as part of the forecast, include the total state rebate investment necessary to facilitate reaching the goal of placing in service at least 5 million zero-emission vehicles by January 1st, 2030. Annually updating the CVRP forecast, projecting sales figures of electric vehicles, and assessing marketing efforts of electric vehicles by automobile manufacturers, among others, are the top 3 elements of the budget bill language that intersect with the requirements of SB 1275. So therefore, we have chosen to cover both of these required reports through the same process. This update will also include a separate but related effort to update the long-term plan for clean mobility equity investments. This year, the first half of the 3-year plan for light-duty ZEV purchase incentives will cover an update on California's new and used EV market and a longer-term plan for CARB's zero-emission vehicle purchase incentive programs, which include CVRP, Clean Cars for All, financing assistance, and Access Clean California. As consumer purchase incentives for electric bicycles is an upcoming effort, we will include more detailed information on e-bikes in future updates to the plan. Staff is utilizing this effort to update the long-term plan to take a deeper look into vehicle purchase incentives to see how we can improve not only implementation, but more importantly, access to these incentives. Staff held the first workshop on February 10th, 2022, which covered updates on the ZEV market and technology. And a recording of this workshop is available on CARB's Low Carbon Transportation Incentives Meetings and Workshops page for those of you who were not able to make it and would like to review what was covered. The second workshop for this effort is planned for Wednesday, March 30th from 12:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. The focus of this workshop is to discuss building and supporting a sustainable and equitable ZEV market here in California. A third workshop is planned for late May of this year and will focus on a discussion of the longer-term vision for CARB's light-duty ZEV purchase incentives and how they can be re-envisioned to better support our various vehicle deployment, climate, and equity goals while improving the overall consumer experience. Staff will also hold program-specific working groups in order to do a deeper dive on critical program changes that may be needed in support of this 3-year plan and the fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan development. So here's a look at the multi-year budget picture for vehicle purchase incentive programs. In addition to the governor's proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year, $250 million is carried over from last year's ZEV package to be allocated in fiscal year 22-23 and 23-24, bringing the total investment through June 2026 to $506 million.
The second portion of the long-term plan update is focused on clean mobility equity investments. The goal is to be complementary to and build upon lessons from purchase incentive programs and the zero-emission vehicle market portion of the long-term plan Raquel just covered, to paint a clear picture of where CARB is headed across our suite of investments. This includes clean mobility equity projects in communities, such as the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, dedicated outreach, technical assistance, capacity building, and workforce training and development. These are essential elements in meeting our mobility equity goals in communities through reducing emissions and being intentional in how we address unique needs and overcome challenges. CARB held a public work group on February 17th focused on background and key highlights of mobility projects since their inception in 2014, as well as the long-term plan process and critical elements, such as objectives, outreach, and metrics to evaluate program outcomes over time. This discussion highlighted specific needs of communities and suggestions for how we can improve upon delivery of an application for clean mobility investments. We're hopeful that through our additional planned public work group meetings in April and May, as well as review of feedback received on our programs as they've been designed and implemented the last few years, that we will have valuable input that allows for development of a comprehensive clean mobility equity strategy, one that not only covers the next few years of investments, but beyond, moving the needle forward in taking our pilots to the next phase of larger, community-centered and focused programs. We anticipate notices for these meetings I mentioned in April and May to be released soon with further details on plan discussion, and of course, welcome any questions or feedback in the interim of our work groups being held. In addition to facilitating a public process, CARB has gathered critical lessons from grantees and implementers of clean mobility projects, as well as users of car sharing and other services. We've also provided dedicated funding to assess community transportation and mobility needs. Together, this information provides a critical path forward for understanding what changes might be required in the clean mobility space to maximize benefits to our most impacted communities. The long-term plan for clean mobility equity investments includes elements we must consider from an equity perspective to center and prioritize community identified needs. Some examples include funding projections, how we plan to spend the first year, fiscal year 22-23 funding, structuring our investments to jumpstart the process of improving the structure of mobility projects, and also developing evaluation measures. This is a process of exploring what has worked well or been challenging, and what these investments could look like to allow for innovative approaches to community-based and centered programs. We're working to refine our objectives for clean mobility equity investments. This will build upon ongoing internal and third-party mobility project evaluation, as well as close coordination across programs, including vehicle purchase incentives and Senate Bill 375 sustainable community programs. Metrics for how we measure the socioeconomic and demographic impacts of our programs, and really makes clear that learning on community investment impacts will be key, improving clean mobility investment outcomes and central to the long-term plan. We look forward to working with all of you further to determine how we can best address the challenges of providing sustainable clean mobility investments in your community. All mobility project lessons and outcomes will be considered for long-term plan development. This includes project evaluation by CARB, external parties such as a research community, feedback received during the solicitation process, as well as user and usage data. CARB's most interested in and focused on lessons that build our understanding and ability to measure and maximize specific socioeconomic benefits, such as increased access to goods, services, and key destinations. We also understand the role of demographic information and how that plays a critical role in making sure clean mobility investments are reaching those communities where underinvestment continues to occur. CARB is interested most in what supporting measures or mobility investment structure would allow for and support more of an evolution from piloting approaches to developing streamlined community-based programs. This will be the focus of our public process this year. The governor's fiscal year 2022-23 proposed budget for clean mobility investments is $419 million. This marks the first multi-year proposal in the history of our clean mobility projects and signals the importance of building a thoughtful plan for how and where funds should be spent. CARB will consider specific concerns and needs we've already heard in the public process and as we've been implementing our projects, and explore how we can address investment gaps. This concludes the presentation for the long-term plan for light-duty vehicle and clean transportation equity investments. We'd now like to open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Raquel and Ashley. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the webinar feature to raise your hand. For those using Zoom online, please click on the raised hand option on the Zoom navigation bar under Participants tab. For those using Zoom on a mobile application, please click on the raised hand option in the More tab. And lastly, for those who are participating by phone, please be sure to press #2 and we will call on you accordingly. Once your line is open, you can begin to speak. And again, we request that you please state your name and affiliation first before providing a comment or asking a question. And you may also type your question into the questions and answers box, and we'll toggle between taking verbal questions and reading and responding to those in the Q&A box. Sean?
Okay. All right, looks like we have a raised hand from Mark Roast. Mark, you're free to unmute your line.
Thank you, Sean. Mark Ruiz, Sustainable Energy, Inc., and advisor to Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition. And my question is the coordination between ACQIB and CEC on the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure part of it. And I'm particularly interested in solar, but could you give a little bit more breadth than the brief mention that there was earlier today on how the money is available and what it's for and that sort of thing, in terms of providing infrastructure to support conversion, to support going to electric vehicles?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So we do coordinate with the Energy Commission. And what I mean by that generally is we meet with them regularly. We talk about where our investments are headed, how our programs are structured, how they could benefit from additional support in the infrastructure space. They share with us what their plans are, where they're headed. CARB participates on their advisory committee for their investments as well. And so we give input on their process very routinely. So we have a very kind of open relationship with them in how we discuss where all of these investments are going to be made and how they can coordinate. So that's what we mean when we say coordination. However, what that doesn't mean is that we don't dictate for them where their investments are being made and vice versa. You know, we work together again to find out where we've got kind of synergy across our projects and how they can work together. But again, they're primarily focused on the infrastructure side and how they can continue to build upon the infrastructure networks that they've already built for various fueling systems throughout the state. And we are primarily focused on the vehicle side, how and where we're going to deploy those vehicles. And again, we do take into consideration where the opportunities exist for their investments and how those will coordinate with ours.
You did have one slide where it mentioned charging infrastructure. It's like I think it was like 26 million or something like that. What was that about?
I'm checking real quick. Unfortunately, I'm not sure which slide.
It was fairly early in
Mark, are you referring to the 2022-23 proposed budget slide that was early on?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the funding on that slide is predominantly for vehicles and equipment. But Lisa did mention early on that, you know, some of our programs do provide funding for an infrastructure component to be a part of the entire project.
That's what I was focused on. Yeah, that's what I was asking about.
Yeah, we have several projects. For example, the financing assistance program for vehicle purchasing when a consumer gets a grant through that program to purchase a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle or an electric vehicle or hydrogen vehicle. On the electric side, we do help with either home charging or a charging card. So that's how that's built in there. And then through our mobility options, a lot of those programs include an infrastructure component in order to use the cars, like a car sharing program. We ensure that we've got the infrastructure built in there. And so some of our programs kind of have this built in, and we make sure that when we're funding something from a kind of package perspective, that's part of that whole package. But not all of our programs do that. Some of our programs are focused primarily just on vehicle deployment. And so those are the times in which we would look to CEC to help figure out, or we would look to place or find ways to support the investments that they're making. So
is there a quote, the one-stop shopping kinds of programs that the state has been working on for a few years?
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a one place where a trucker, say, could go to get the money to both actually apply for their equipment and also to apply for, through CC to apply for their solar powered charging?
I don't believe that right now that there's a single platform on the heavy duty side to be able to do that. But I know that a lot of the groups that we work with, if there is somebody that's coming through and say getting HVIP dollars to purchase a truck, there are opportunities to get information, and there are folks within the HVIP realm that will help guide you to how to get those other incentives as well, if there are incentives available for being able to get that associated charging. If it's part of a pilot project, for example, though, where we are funding a group, say, of yard trucks, and we're testing out, we're piloting how those might work in a particular area, then we would cover the charging there. But on a vehicle by vehicle basis, no, we're happy to help facilitate that conversation, but there isn't currently a platform for being able to do that.
Okay, so I did mention those 3 trucks. It would be good if I could find out who to talk to support that person who's trying to upgrade or replace 3 trucks.
Yeah, we'll get you in touch with folks on the heavy duty team, and they can get you the connections that you need there. And I'll make sure to drop in the chat the link to the HVIP program in just a few moments.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have another raised hand from Yasmin Angelitis. Yasmin, you're free to unmute your line.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, good morning. My name is Yasmin Angelitis. I'm here with Earthjustice. Thanks so much for hosting this workshop today. This is really helpful. I just had a comment. It's really exciting with the level of funds that CARB has at its disposal over the next few years. So we're really happy to see all this funding to clean the air. And this will have, really big impacts on cleaning the air. And there's also a lot of potential for this funding to create good high road careers in California. So I really just want to raise the point that we should make sure that this money goes first and foremost to benefiting the disadvantaged communities that have, for decades been had to bear the brunt of the, environmental harms of diesel pollution and transportation and freight pollution. So want to make sure that the funding is, really prioritized to benefit those communities first and foremost. And then also that, this HVIP funding is really tied to creating good high road jobs. It's a lot of money. It was awesome. And there's just a lot of potential there to have multiple benefits, including creating good jobs for California. And so want to elevate that point as well. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Yasmin.
Okay, we have another raised hand from Camille Williams. Camille, you're free to unmute your line.
Hi, my name is Camille Williams, and I'm an independent consultant, CW Consulting. And I just have a question. So the funding that you guys have to buy EVs is great, but I'm wondering about the long-term support for low-income and minoritized communities to be able to afford and maintain these vehicles. Is there funding for that?
That's a great question, Camille. So maintenance on EVs is really, really low compared to a traditional vehicle. And so we haven't gotten a lot of feedback from consumers through our programs that there have been any maintenance issues, so to speak, for maintaining the cars longer term. We have heard anecdotally over the years that there are maybe battery degradation issues and things like that. But we still have had a hard time finding information and data on that. And so if there is information that you can share with us so that we can help understand what the issues are around kind of the longer term needs for these vehicles, we would really appreciate it. We do want to ensure that support is there for vehicle ownership, kind of longer term, making sure the batteries are lasting, making sure that consumers are trusting of this technology, that it's going to be there to support them for the same amount of time that they would be supported through an internal combustion engine purchase. But again, there's not a whole lot of data to show, and we do have a lot of these vehicles now have been on the road for over a decade. And we are seeing that most of them still last. We are seeing, some that are the early EVs that maybe don't have as great of battery range as they did when they first started, the very early ones. But some of the ones that have been out 5 or 6 years now, we're not seeing that. So if you've got data or you've got information you can point us to, we would love to see it.
Yeah. I'm assuming that data can be found from vehicle dealerships and their service records. And also there are, I believe Texas has an Institute for Transportation. Virginia has one. Then there are car consumer agencies that may be able to provide that information for you. But there's just, even if it's not related to EVs, but there's just general maintenance that people have to pay for, right? Your oil changes and your brakes and just other maintenance things that happens when you own a car. And so the concern is that people will be left out if they can't afford just basic fundamental maintenance. So I'm just wondering, is there support or a backup plan for that?
So yeah, that's a great comment. Again, right now there isn't. And again, that's because primarily, there aren't on electric vehicles, there aren't oil changes, there's not a whole lot of fluids that you fill other than maybe your windshield wiper fluid. There are tires, there are brakes, there are some of those basic standard things. And then there, of course, is, keeping the car maintained for the most part. But some of those regular costs that you would have with an internal combustion engine, you don't have with an EV, which is one of the great reasons to move to an EV to begin with. But I do hear your comment, and the team and I will kick around some ideas to figure out where support is needed and how we can try to fold that into programs in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have some questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure where we are on time. If that's okay, we can read a couple of those questions.
Yep, let's get a few of those. Go for it, Sam.
I can start. Loretta Ellert had a couple of questions. Would funding to begin a bike share program be an eligible project under the $65 million Sustainable Transportation and Mobility Equity Program? Ava had answered in the chat that yes, bike share programs are currently eligible. Whether they continue to be eligible, we have not talked about not allowing them to be an eligible project. There are a lot of other issues that are coming up that we're going to have to address. But we plan to continue to propose funding bike share programs. And then on your follow-up program regarding bike sharing programs, would both a feasibility study to implement a program as well as implementation such as equipment be eligible? So you bring up a really good point. Right now, we currently require in one of our programs that a community does a needs assessment. So does that community really want a car sharing or bike sharing program? And if so, how does the community show that? And the needs assessment does that. What you're bringing up is a great point, and something we're trying to address as we move from these small pilots to more community-based programs. Where is a bike share project, if it's wanted in the community, does it make financial sense to invest in that particular mobility type within that community? And if so, what is going to be necessary to not only launch the bike sharing pilot, but to continue it going for all the long term after CARB's funds run out? So as we look at the gaps that we have been identifying of where funding should go, the feasibility study is a great comment and something that we've talked about and may be able to roll into what we offer funding for communities as they plan these projects, as well as implementation equipment. Our scope of eligibility costs are very broad in the mobility programs. We want to provide a community with all of the tools and resources that we can so that they can successfully launch these mobility programs. So again, we're going to be identifying in the work group process additional gaps that we're going to try to figure out how to fund and when to fund. So with great comments and questions, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation with you.
So just a quick time check. I think we'll have time to go over maybe one more question or comment, and then we'll initiate our break for the morning.
So there was a question in the QA that I can touch on real quick, which was from Lily Parker. She said, Ashley, you stated the focus is for you to learn our understanding by gaining access to goods. What were the other areas of focus? So I just wanted to clarify that what I was referring to is that the clean mobility portion of the long-term plan is focused on measuring and tracking socioeconomic benefits that focus on increasing access to goods and services, as well as key destinations. So that was the part I think that you were getting at, such as hospitals, employment, and training opportunities for California's most impacted communities. And I also wanted to just touch on something that Mark Roast was asking about earlier, specific to infrastructure and our coordination with CEC. I didn't want to interrupt, but we do also have the Ideals of Workforce pilot project that we mentioned earlier on in the presentation. And though this doesn't provide direct funding to support installation of infrastructure, it does provide an incredible amount of support for training and workforce training and development opportunities in these communities that could include infrastructure installation. So I wanted to make sure that was clear, Mark, and I'll make sure to send you more information on that program.
I'm going to cover one or two really quick as well, and then we'll still have a short break. So we've got a question here. Will CARB consolidate various programs to support ZEV purchases into one single program? It's time consuming to track the incentive programs and the amount being offered. That's from Akiko Yamagami. That is definitely one of the things that we're talking about. And so I encourage you to participate in our long-term plan process so that we can find the best ways to structure our light duty purchase incentive programs. And then will CARB have the flexibility to stack incentives where applicable with federal funding, especially as it relates to infrastructure? That's from Christopher Amandano. That's a great question. We do look at our federal funding opportunities. It is a little bit more challenging kind of wading through the federal system. It is typically offered in a different forum, but we will continue to evaluate where those opportunities exist and try to find ways to leverage that funding. It has CARB considered using revenue bonds to provide low interest loans to take advantage of cost savings of an EV compared to a traditional vehicle. This would be similar to New Deal rural electrification in 1930s from Jack Fleck. Great question. Not something that we had considered. So we will look into how we could potentially leverage revenue bonds going forward. With that, Grace, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So we're now going to have a short break. We will resume at 10:10 to begin our discussion on the light duty and clean transportation equity investments. So see you all back in a few minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we're now going to provide an update on our light duty and clean transportation equity projects, beginning with the vehicle purchase incentive projects. So I'd like to reintroduce Raquel Leon, who's the lead over the clean vehicle rebate project, Ali Kuastani, who is the lead over our financing assistance program, Anthony Poggi, who is the lead over our Clean Cars for All program, Aria Berliner, who is over our, she'll be presenting our electric bicycle incentive project, and Nick Narenbirch, who is the lead over our Access Clean California project. Raquel?
Yes, so our suite of vehicle purchase incentives includes CVRP, which provides rebates for the purchase or lease of eligible new EVs, Clean Cars for All, which provides incentives to replace older vehicles with cleaner vehicles in certain air districts, financing assistance, which provides lower interest rate loans and grants to lower income individuals to purchase cleaner vehicles, and the Electric Bicycle Incentive Project, which provides incentives for the purchase of electric bikes. CVRP, which promotes clean vehicle adoption in California, offers rebates of up to $7,000 for the purchase or lease of new eligible zero-emission vehicles, including electric, plug-in hybrid electric, and fuel cell vehicles. Through September of 2021, CVRP has issued over 450,000 rebates totaling over $1 billion, with a breakdown shown on the slide by rebate type. Last year, CVRP received a total allocation of $525 million, with $10 million of that allocation earmarked for the creation of an electric bicycle incentive program, and $515 million for CVRP, with the intent to fund the program through fiscal year 2023-24. A plan of phased-in changes was approved by the board last November, and the first set of changes took effect last month on February 24th. Those changes included a decrease in the income cap for standard rebate eligibility and a decrease in the MSRP cap to $45,000 for smaller vehicle classes. Updated funding projections presented on February 10th indicate that the multi-year allocation will last the entire 3-year period covered based on program design changes that were approved in last year's funding plan. I will note that the ZEV market projections are highly volatile and could easily change, and staff will continue monitoring them closely, especially as vehicle inventory starts to return to previous levels. Additional information on these changes and updated projections can be found on the CVRP website. While the board has approved a second set of changes planned for next year, staff will spend time over the next few months to meet with stakeholders and analyze whether those changes are indeed necessary to keep the program open through fiscal year 2023-24, and if any changes need to be made to the plan.
And now for financing assistance. Financing assistance for lower income consumers started as a pilot project in Northern California and at the state level in 2018 to help low income consumers in purchasing clean vehicles by providing purchase price down grants and facilitating access to fair financing. Since then, about $43 million has been allocated and spent in the project, which helped to pay for about more than 4,600 vehicle grants, 1,700 home charging grants or charging cards for public stations, and 1,500 low interest loans. As part of last year's budget and funding plan, $23.5 million was allocated for the program. Part of the funding is being used to pay for the current reservation list in the statewide program. The remaining portion of the allocation will be used to relaunch the program once a grantee is selected through a competitive solicitation process that we aim to hold soon. The relaunch of the program will be sometime later this year with major changes, such as adoption of a need-based model, implementation of a vehicle purchase price cap, loan term and amount cap, and graduation of hybrid vehicles from the project.
So now on to Clean Cars for All. Clean Cars for All, or CC4A, is administered through participating air districts and focuses on providing incentives to lower income California drivers to scrap their older, higher polluting car and replace it with a zero or near zero emission vehicle. Opportunities for participants to take advantage of alternative mobility options and charging incentives are included. To date, over 190 million has been allocated to the CC4A program. The program has funded more than 12,000 vehicle replacement projects across 4 participating air districts, which include South Coast AQMD, San Joaquin APCD, Bay Area AQMD, and Sacramento Metropolitan AQMD. Replacements include over 8,000 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and zero-emission vehicles. Including projects funded solely by EFMP base funds, the total number of projects is over 13,000. In addition to vehicle replacements, Clean Cars for All has also funded over 170 EVSE installations and over 100 prepaid vehicle charging cards. Currently, 3 of 4 air districts with existing programs are open to new applications. Sacramento Air District is currently closed to new applications as they continue to work through a backlog of existing applications. San Diego Air District has been awarded funding to begin implementation of their program. The fiscal year 21-22 funding plan outlined changes for Clean Cars for All, including statewide expansion. Expanding statewide is a necessary step to continue providing equitable access to clean vehicles in California's underdeserved communities and contribute to the state's zero-emission vehicle deployment goals. Lessons learned through the pilot phase of the program include the need for consumer protections, consumer education, as well as targeted and community-based outreach will continue to be core tenets of the program. Staff plan to hold a public work group meeting in April to further develop the expansion proposal. Additionally, staff has worked to update the Clean Cars for All program guidelines to enhance the program's flexibility and responsiveness. Guideline updates expected to be completed in April will enable the flexibilities outlined in the fiscal year 2021-2022 funding plan, including allowing districts to require only the cleanest vehicle technologies, lowering the income cap, and offer increased incentive amounts. Finally, CARB publishes the AB 630 report for each fiscal year. This report examines the program's performance, sets goals for the upcoming year, and informs other long-term planning efforts, including CARB's 3-year plan for light-duty ZEV purchase incentives. Beginning with fiscal year 2022-2023, the AB 630 report will be developed as part of this year's funding plan. Work groups beginning in April will provide opportunities for stakeholders to provide input on the goals set for the program to ensure Clean Cars for All is meeting the needs of communities, particularly as CARB looks to expand the program statewide.
As mentioned previously, $10 million of the fiscal year 21-2022 CVRP allocation is to be used to establish the Electric Bicycle Incentives Project. Staff have held a handful of work groups to discuss the project and aim to release a solicitation for a program administrator very soon with an expected program launch sometime in late 2022. Staff are exploring a number of policy considerations, such as opening the program to individuals possibly as young as 14 years in qualifying low-income households, since 14 represents high school age, and some stakeholders have indicated that this age is a good place to start. However, we are still seeking feedback on the appropriate age, and we aim to have more in-depth conversations on this in future work groups. Staff is also considering limiting the price of eligible e-bikes and structuring the program to have 2 incentive levels, one for individuals with lower incomes and one for individuals with moderate incomes. These and many other policy considerations will be determined over the course of the next several months through a transparent implementation work group process. Because we know there is much interest for this project to launch, staff aims to get the project running on a timeline that is separate from the funding plan process, but will use the funding plan process to provide updates and share recommended policies in advance of launch.
Access Clean California is a multidimensional outreach project that streamlines access to and coordinates outreach for clean transportation and clean energy equity projects for consumers. This project resulted from community desire to make incentives and information on these opportunities more readily available, as identified in the SB 350 Barriers Report. The pilot phase focused on clean vehicle purchase incentive projects, including Clean Cars for All, financing assistance for lower income consumers, and clean vehicle assistance and rebate programs. The longer-term vision of Access Clean California is to be a climate equity-focused multi-agency platform that goes beyond vehicle purchase incentives. So far, a total of $14 million has been allocated to this project. This includes $5 million in Volkswagen settlement funds in 2017-18, $5 million in greenhouse gas reduction funds in 2019-20, and $4 million in greenhouse gas reduction funds in fiscal year 2021-22. Please note that this total does not include the $1 million in funding allocated towards technical assistance and capacity building in fiscal year 2019-20. So far, CARB has spent about $8.5 million on developing and supporting two major components: streamlining the application process via centralized application web tool or a benefits finder, and building and supporting a network of outreach partners to help coordinate community outreach. CARB is working with the grantee, Grid Alternatives, to further refine the benefits finder and expand the outreach partner network to ensure the most impacted and marginalized communities are included. Some of the priorities for the remaining funding, including the fiscal year 21-22 allocation, include improving the benefits finder and expanding to additional incentive programs, identifying and filling outreach gaps with an emphasis on setting measurable participation targets for underrepresented communities, such as rural and African American communities, and exploring areas of improvement for outreach and engagement with overburdened communities. We are working to schedule a work group meeting in late April to talk in more depth about Access Clean California. And
Thank
we'll
you.
now open it up for questions. Go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. So that concludes our presentation on the light duty purchase incentive programs. So we're going to open it up for questions and comments. I'd like to thank Raquel, Ali, Anthony, Aria, and Nick. So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the webinar feature to raise your hand. For those using Zoom online, please click on the raise hand option on the Zoom navigation bar under Participants tab. For those using Zoom on a mobile application, please click on the raised hand option in the More tab. For those participating by telephone, please be sure to press #2 and we will call on you accordingly. Once your line is open, you can begin to speak. Please state your name and affiliation first before providing a comment or asking a question. And lastly, you may also type your question in the Q&A box and we'll alternate between verbal and written questions. Sean?
Okay, it looks like we have a question from Christopher Chavez. Christopher, you're free to unmute your line.
Yes, thank you. This is Chris Chavez, Deputy Policy Director at Coalition for Clean Air. Thank you for this information. Just a couple quick points on the Clean Cars for All program. As you know, this is a the equity mobility programs are always a priority for the Charge Ahead campaign and the Invest in Clean Air campaign. Regarding Clean Cars for All, certainly the statewide expansion is something that we've been interested in hearing about, and seeing CARB continue on this is we're still interested in seeing how it plans, what the implementation is like. One thing I would just point out from our comments last year when statewide expansion first came up is that we would hope that any funding for the program is in excess of the programs that are currently operating. It would be a shame to have the programs that are currently funded and operating being having to compete for the same pot of money that we had, that is available for the statewide expansion. I think CARB mentioned this a little, touched it briefly last year, but it'd be great to hear that again, that you're intending this to be above and beyond what's already currently funded. The other thing, as usual, for our comment is that we're still very concerned about the South Coast and Bay Area districts sending out 1099 forms to participants of the Clean Cars for All program. We think that's inappropriate and sets up folks for a surprise tax bill when they have to file, which undermines the effectiveness of the program. So certainly would hope and would like to see some continued attention to that going forward. I understand that CARB is, when we asked this last time, is continuing to work on it, but we would hope to see a resolution to this sooner than later. I think those are my comments for now. Like I said, we generally want to see more investment in the equity programs and then trying to make sure that we're reducing the barriers for the folks that have the most barriers, which is the low income and disadvantaged communities. Great to see that there's some attention also being paid to the charging infrastructure side as well. So at this, I know there are a couple other things that caught my eye. The electric bike incentives project looks promising. We haven't had a chance to discuss it internally, and certainly look forward to providing some more comments on that and other aspects of the funding plan in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, Sean, I'll go ahead and respond to follow up with what Chris said. This is Anthony Poggi, lead staff for the Clean Cars for All program. Thank you for your comments, Chris. We do envision the same of the statewide program being an additive, complementary to the existing programs. And while nothing's finalized until the budget is signed, it looks like the funding will be that way in principle, and then in practice and implementation, that will be not as much a competition, but a complement to the existing programs. As far as the 1099 issue goes, I'll say this for everyone interested, including you, Chris. So federal law does require that the district, being the program administrator, make a determination whether or not that incentive is taxable. And as some of you may know, 2 districts implementing the Clean Cars for All program currently issue 1099s. CARB can't issue tax advice, but we have met with the districts to relay the intent of the program, which is to provide vehicle purchase buy downs for lower income consumers and not to serve as taxable income or otherwise negatively impact their financial situation. And as far as updates, we do continue to work with the district and tax regulators to get any additional clarity in order to harmonize the district programs on this issue.
Chris, I see that there's also a question from you in the Q&A box asking for some clarification on the 125 million in carryover funds. Aaron or Anthony, would either of you be willing to explain how that 125 fits into the bigger picture?
Sure, I'll go ahead and take that one, Lisa. Thanks. Chris, we definitely see the statewide expansion as a multi-year project. So that 125 million, as Anthony mentioned, we're still working through the details of how that expansion is going to roll out, but we definitely view that expansion as a multi-year project. And so with that 125 million, we're looking for that to carry us through a couple of years. Again, getting into the work groups this April, we'll discuss in further detail how we envision that expansion to roll out. But I think in principle, we see the expansion in general as a multi-year project. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, no more hands raised. We can go ahead and look at the Q&A real quick.
Yes, thank you, Sean. So we have some holdover questions first from the morning session that I'll tackle very quickly. To clear those out, first from Mike Castillo, can you specify which vehicle grant programs do not require destruction of an existing diesel? Interested specifically in the potential for electric terminal truck deployment in Oakland. So Mike, the hybrid zero emission and the HVIP does not require scrap of an old truck. It is a purely purchase incentive program, and there is a link to that program in the chat box that hopefully you're able to access. And if not, we're happy to help you after the meeting to show you those programs, where to find the information for those programs. And then another question from Clive Melville, how under the expanding efforts for the 22-23 funding plan, how will CARB focus on offering its support to owner operators and small fleets with zero emission goals? Great question. And this afternoon, we will be talking a little bit more about the innovative e-fleet program within HVIP, but we do have opportunities available currently within our truck loan assistance program for owner operators and for smaller fleets, and more to come within HVIP. And we'll explain a lot more of that this afternoon. Lastly, last is a clarifying question there that we're responding to in writing. And then a general question on our stance on commercial charging infrastructure. Again, we work very closely with the Energy Commission, who is charged with with those efforts and ensuring that commercial charging infrastructure is deployed throughout the state. And with that, I believe that we have cleared out our questions in the Q&A as well. So do we have any hands raised too?
Not at this time.
Okay, let's give it that one more minute. And if no other questions come up, then we will move on to the next section.
Last call for raised hands. Alrighty, so we're gonna transition and provide an update on our clean mobility projects. I'd like to introduce Ava Yahubirad she's the lead over the Clean Mobility Vouchers pilot program. Heather Choi, who's lead over our Clean Mobility in Schools project. Bree Swenson, who's the lead over our Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, or STEP. Noemi Vitella, who will be presenting our workforce training and development efforts, and Violet Martin, who will be presenting on our community transportation needs assessments and technical assistance and capacity building endeavors. Ava?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Our clean mobility programs are intended to address mobility needs that go beyond personal vehicle ownership. Clean mobility investments are increasingly important to meet the dynamic needs of communities. These incentive programs support meeting the unique needs of communities, which has been a historical challenge with transportation projects. The intent is to support and prioritize community-driven solutions and multi-sector approaches, such as promoting clean transportation in schools, statewide projects to increase mobility options and access to key destinations, especially in areas of the states where communities do not have the same level of access and face increasing burdens from the cost of personal transportation. We also provide funding for programs centered around developing outreach plan, targeting low-income residents across California to increase residents' awareness of clean transportation, conducting transportation needs assessments, providing technical assistance and additional support to communities, particularly those with limited resources and that struggle to compete for project funding. In addition, we want to support communities and the state's economic recovery through investing deliberately in job training and workforce development programs. We've been investing in clean mobility options since 2014-15. In past, we've had 2 competitive grant solicitations, which resulted in multiple regional car share and ride share projects that are currently in various stages of implementation and expansion. This slide provides a quick reference of the current active projects we have funded, their core focus, and where they are located. These regional clean mobility pilot projects have provided a critical foundation for understanding the clean mobility landscape of priority populations. In summary, our community car share provides zero-emission car sharing services and transit mobility subsidies for Sacramento affordable multi-unit housing and other communities. Car sharing and mobility hubs in affordable housing is a unique multi-phase project that provide clean mobility options, including transit subsidies, ride-hailing services, and possible e-bike or scooter share in Bay Area housing and other communities in Oakland, Richmond, and San Jose. Ecosystem of Shared Mobility is one of our rural focused pilots, which provides electric vehicle car share and mobility application called VAMUS in Tulare and Kern counties in the communities of Arvin, Lamont, Wasco, Coulter, Orosi, and Visalia. Lift Line Paratransit is another unique project that focuses on the unique needs of disabled communities, providing American for Disabilities Act shuttle bus replacement in Watsonville in County. And Blue LA Car Share provides zero-emission car share and other mobility options for Los Angeles communities of Westlake, Koreatown, Pico Union, Downtown, Eco Park, Boyle Heights, South Central, and Chinatown. An important part of clean mobility investments is being clear on timing of when these investments began, how much we have awarded for each project to date, and the current status. Fiscal year 2014-15 projects include Blue LA Car Share, which was awarded $4.7 million and is still active and working to expand in other parts of the city of LA. Our community car share awarded a total of $6 million. This project is also active and working to expand from 8 affordable housing sites to 10 this year in Sacramento. Our 5 fiscal year 2016-17 projects include Lift Line Paratransit with $516,000 total funding awarded for a total of 3 ADA shuttles, and it's active. Car sharing and mobility hubs in affordable housing has received approximately $3 million in total funds, and it's active, though not fully launched yet. Valley Air Zev Mobility has received $750,000 and inactive as of January 2022 due to the initial COVID-19 shutdown and subsequent lack of demand for shared mobility in a couple of communities. Project parties will examine data and share lessons learned with CARB and other partners in future. Ecosystem of Shared Mobility has been awarded $3 million total. It's an active project, but will end in July 2022. Agricultural Worker Bamboo Pilot Project received a total of $6 million to date. This project is not operable due to technology limitations with agricultural worker vehicle applications, but has been a central project for better understanding needs of rural farm workers communities. Needs of these communities continue to be a consideration for future investments in CARB. In partnership with the California Energy Commission, the Clean Mobility Options Voucher Pilot Program, or CMO, is a statewide program that provides funding for clean shared transportation options, including zero-emission car sharing, van pool, electric, regular bike share, scooter share, and ride-hailing services in the state's most under-resourced communities, including rural, small government organizations, and smaller tribal low-income communities. This project was developed for the purpose of addressing SB 350 barriers report, community input, and the needs for a statewide mobility funding source with the goals of improving under-resourced communities' access to key destinations. $55 million has been allocated to this project to date. This includes past and expected fiscal year 2021-2022 CARB funds and $8 million in California Energy Commission funding contribution. This does not include approximately $24 million in funding allocated to CARB's earlier regional clean mobility project that I just discussed on the previous slide. CMO awarded 24 needs assessment vouchers and 20 mobility project vouchers in its first application window in 2020, which were quickly oversubscribed. Awardees include nonprofits, local government, transit agencies, and Native American tribal governments to conduct local planning efforts and assess transportation gaps in their community, and also implement different clean mobility projects that fit residents' needs. You will see where these projects are located on the map in upcoming slides. Staff are currently waiting for the new disadvantaged community and low-income communities designations to be updated and finalized before releasing the new implementation manual and finalized plans for opening the next application window. Updates to application material will be based on lessons learned from the first application window, input from all of our awardees and applicants and community organizations and other stakeholders, including for how to streamline further and simplify the application process. We anticipate the second application window to include a total of at least 16 million. 15 million to be made available for mobility projects and 1 million to be made available for community transportation needs assessment.
That's me. Hi. Let me get my notes up again. All right, so Clean Mobility in Schools pilot projects promote the role schools and our young scholars and leaders play in not only fighting climate change, but also increasing awareness and use of cleaner, sustainable transportation and mobility options. Grant goals and requirements were developed to ensure school communities could design their pilot elements according to what they needed and wanted. Options included vehicle and equipment purchases, as well as deeper planning and research elements like zero energy plans, active transportation project planning, and customized outreach and education campaigns. School districts in El Monte, Stockton, and San Diego are coming up to their 2-year anniversary in a few months, with many elements either already deployed or near launching. And with funds allocated in last year's funding plan, ACQIB is in the process of awarding 1 new grant with Twin River School District in Sacramento. Total grant funding per project ranges from $7 to nearly $10 million each. And when all 4 grants are complete, 100% of the funds will directly benefit disadvantaged communities with about 130 zero-emission vehicles, including school buses, cars and vans for staff and student purposes, maintenance carts, landscape and custodial equipment, and a flock of e-bikes, and charging infrastructure and upgrades to support their zero emission future. The zero emission lawnmowers, like the one shown on the slide, were so well received by one school district that they're ordering more for additional school sites with their own budget resources. School district and partner staff have participated in various presentations and forums nationally to share their experiences and encourage other school districts to explore zero emission opportunities in their areas. We look forward to learning more from these projects and support the analysis for the Clean Mobility Investments Long-Term Plan. Thank you.
STEP, or the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, is a transportation equity pilot that has 3 goals: address community residents' transportation needs, increase access to key destinations, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It pursues these goals by funding planning, clean transportation, and supporting projects in disadvantaged and low-income communities. It's a competitive grant program administered directly by ACQIB that provides a source of funding for larger projects than are funded through the Clean Mobility Options Voucher pilot program. It also provides flexibility to fund projects that address community residents' needs and encourages grantees to prioritize community involvement and decision-making in every stage of project planning and implementation. For example, through the STEP implementation grant for the City of Commerce, STEP is funding the city's first Class 2 bike lane, new electric buses and shuttles for expanded dial-a-ride and fixed route services, a tree planting project to help clean the city's air and encourage pedestrian activity, a transit-oriented development and displacement avoidance plan for a neighborhood cited for a new light rail station, and outreach and engagement events meant to encourage clean transportation use and involve residents in the STEP projects. STEP awarded 11 grants through its first solicitation in summer 2020, which was extremely oversubscribed. With funding from last year's funding plan, ACQIB is now in the process of continuing to award proposals from the first solicitation that ACQIB didn't have enough funding for the first time around. Based on stakeholder input And due to the complexity of the STEP grants, CARB recognized the need to provide technical assistance to support applicants during the solicitation period and grantees during grant implementation. Technical assistance has been particularly critical for the planning grantees in helping them learn about and incorporate equitable practices into their work. This visual represents CARB's planning and mobility investments since the beginning of our regional clean mobility projects in fiscal year 2014-15. We've also highlighted where there will be future investments for clean mobility in schools and STEP. I'll just leave this slide up for a second so that you can have some time to digest it before we move on. All right.
CARB aims to support the green economy and economic recovery through workforce training and development investments. Through these investments, CARB is addressing the community needs identified in the SB 350 Barriers Report for access to training and programs that help transition the workforce to zero emission. Nearly $3.8 million has been allocated to date for workforce training and development. This includes $1 million in 2019-2020 state operations funds for the implementation of the Ideals of Workforce Pilot Project in partnership with the California Energy Commission. $1.5 million in the 21-22 funding to partner with adult and vocational schools, and $1.28 million in 2021-2022 funding to co-create a new transportation electrification pre-apprenticeship program with the California Energy Commission based on lessons from the Ideals of Workforce Pilot Project. The goals are to work in partnership to expand opportunities for light and heavy duty training, including hands-on learning and curriculum, and to make workforce development a priority for clean mobility equity investments to support future clean transportation needs, such as zero emission vehicle repair, charging infrastructure installation, and broader education and awareness. One opportunity CARB is leveraging is working with the California Energy Commission to implement the Ideals of Workforce Pilot Project starting this spring. This project provides a mix of large and small community investments that support zero emission vehicles and infrastructure, as well as ZEV-related commercial technology statewide. Projects include community and employer engagement and pathways towards clean transportation careers. An announcement has been made for a notice of proposed award, which will go before the California Energy Commission at the April 13th business meeting. More information can be found on the California Energy Commission website. Also, as mentioned, we're using 2021-22 funding to support zero emission vehicle and technology vocational and adult school programs. CARB will be holding a second work group meeting on April 12th to discuss investment objectives and to collect public and stakeholder feedback. A public notice will be sent out soon and information will be posted to CARB's webpage.
The SB 350 Barriers Report recommended expanding assessments of priority populations' clean transportation and mobility needs through deep and meaningful engagement, and to ensure when we make investment decisions, we're respecting community knowledge and assets, increasing access to opportunity, and delivering direct and meaningful benefits to low-income, tribal, and disadvantaged communities. To date, $3.9 million has been invested to pilot community transportation needs assessments through the CMO Voucher Pilot Program and STEP. Partnering with the Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of Berkeley for technical assistance, continuous improvement, and evaluation supports understanding how the community transportation needs assessment programs are working and where there are opportunities for improvement. This includes, for example, developing strategies, resources, and recommended policies for the inclusion and centering of people who have been traditionally excluded or extracted from and marginalized in community-based transportation planning efforts. Ultimately, CARB wants to support and build capacity for equitable transportation planning strengthen links of funding sources to community identified needs, and collaborate with other agencies to break down silos to advance transportation equity efforts. Supporting under-resourced communities to increase awareness and improve access to CARB's incentive projects is key to meeting clean mobility equity goals. This includes gathering and considering lessons learned and outcomes from ongoing efforts, such as technical assistance and outreach activities. Technical assistance and capacity building have been primarily implemented through CARB's existing projects, such as STEP and CMO. For STEP, CARB offers technical assistance through 2 contracts, one through the Strategic Growth Council with a team led by Estelano Advisors, and one through UC Berkeley with a team led by the Othering and Belonging Institute. What technical assistance looks like is a little different in each community, based on the vision and needs grantees are articulating. For the CMO voucher pilot program, technical assistance is provided by the program's statewide administrator. CMO also supports technical assistance and networking through its Clean Mobility Equity Alliance, which is a forum to bring mobility projects and needs assessment funding recipients together to foster knowledge sharing, address issues, and identify barriers and opportunities. In fiscal year 1920, CARB allocated funding for technical assistance and capacity building programs, capacity building grants for smaller community-based organizations to conduct outreach and increase awareness of CARB's funding in priority populations. Administered through Access Clean California, this capacity building pilot has so far funded 6 small CBO partners to conduct community-centered outreach in some hard-to-reach communities. Through this effort, the Access Clean California administrator, Grid Alternatives, supported CBO partner capacity building through one-on-one coaching, workshops, and networking events with SGC's partners Advancing Climate Equity Program, and piloted workforce development strategies by placing 6 full-time fellows at partner organizations. Last November, the board approved $1 million for additional technical assistance and capacity building grants to community-based organizations. CARB will be hosting work group meetings in the coming months to discuss how to implement this funding. Having multiple equity pilots requires evaluation work to understand what's working and what's not, so the state can make iterative improvements and program changes and direct investments effectively to achieve the state's goals. Since mobility investments are equity focused, the evaluative work holds at its core a responsibility to advance progress towards equity and reflects the principles of equity and how it is designed and implemented. Both qualitative and quantitative data collection and analysis is anticipated to help drive future policy decisions and to identify emerging priorities. The evaluation process includes analyzing greenhouse gas emissions reductions from projects, as well as reductions in vehicle miles traveled, and specific socioeconomic benefits I mentioned earlier includes access to key destinations and essential goods and services. CARB has and is continuing to conduct evaluations in a number of ways. Some examples include through research contracts with UC Berkeley, which it will help identify factors that impact initial implementation and sustained delivery of STEP and CMO, and shape, for example, whether needs assessments continue to be funded as part of those programs, or if different approaches are needed to advance equitable transportation planning. STEP's early technical assistance providers, Estelano Advisors, surveyed applicants and non-applicants and developed an interim report outlining lessons learned from the first STEP solicitation. This report is available on the STEP webpage. In early 2021, the Green Lining Institute conducted an independent evaluation of CARB, the Energy Commission, and other clean transportation projects, and has been working with us to incorporate standards for equitable community investments. This report is also available online. Lastly, we rely heavily on data and feedback directly from our grantees and the users of clean transportation projects to inform the direction of these pilots, and welcome ongoing discussions with communities to understand what is working well and where changes are necessary. Thank you. This concludes the presentation for the Clean Mobility projects. I'll pass it back to Grace now to take questions and comments.
Thank you, Ava, Heather, Bree, Noemi, and Violet. So we're going to open the floor back up for questions. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the webinar feature to raise your hand. Again, for those using Zoom online, please click on the raised hand option on the Zoom navigation bar under Participants tab. For those using Zoom on a mobile application, please click on the raised hand option in the More tab. For those participating by phone, please be sure to press #2 and we will call on you accordingly. Once your line's open, you can begin to speak. And again, please state your name and affiliation first before providing a comment or asking a question. And lastly, you may also type your question or comment into the question and answer box. We'll toggle between taking verbal questions and reading and responding to those in the Q&A box. Sean?
Okay, we have a raised hand from Beverly Deshow. Beverly, you're free to unmute your line.
Hi, my name is Beverly Deshow. I am with the Electric Vehicle Association Central Coast chapter. I'm wondering if you have not only technical assistance for, but also funding for the equipment for bidirectional charging for schools. We're looking at doing it's more than just that. We're looking at getting bidirectional charging where the school has already has electric school buses as well as solar, and we'd like to see about setting up a microgrid using those things. So using the school bus, which has a huge battery that's mostly not being used, as a backup for the solar on the schools.
So I'm happy to take this question, everybody. That's a great question, Beverly. And there's a lot of different entities that need to come together for a project like that, right? So it's not just CARB's role for incentivizing the vehicles, but also there's the Energy Commission for their infrastructure assistance, and the CPUC for interconnection rules, as well as the local utilities. So depending on if it's one of the bigger utilities, they tend to have programs to help with fleet planning and these types of larger projects. So I understand, though, it's hard to navigate all of those details and get everybody together to help you with a really cool sounding project. What I would encourage you to do is to look at the Energize program. It's Energize with 2 I's and then .org at the end. So it's something that CEC and CalSTART are facilitating, and March 23rd is the first time it's opening up. So if you haven't heard of that program yet, I really encourage you to talk to them. They're really great at responding to questions too. And then the other suggestion I was going to provide is to, if you haven't already, really figure out what utility requires in terms of approving a project that includes a different level of V2G or anything like that. But it's definitely a new idea, and that I know that the CPUC and their interconnection rules are really trying to make sure is easier for school districts to implement. And so yeah, let me know if you have any other questions, but hopefully that helped.
Yes, I do actually. First of all, was it ENERGIIZE? Is that the name? .com?
.org.
.org. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
We did have somebody just drop it in the Q&A box, and I will also drop the link in the chat for you.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you so much. One other something that we have been struggling with on the Central Coast here is that our electricity is provided by our community choice aggregator, which is supposed to be not regulated by the CPUC, although the CPUC has been imposing itself on our organization. And the other thing is that we understand, and perhaps you're not the person to answer the question, but I'll run it by you anyway. We understand that if something is, well, first of all, not part of our investor-owned utility, and number two, if it were to, in fact, be islanded all the time, if it were to completely drop off the grid and be its own microgrid operating all the time, using the solar, because that's when the schools are mostly used, is during the day, with the backup, of course, of the battery charging. Would that then also, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, would that also make it not under the purview of the CPUC, so therefore it would not have to be restricted? And that's what we're seeing. We're looking at microgrids in the community, and what we're seeing are all those limitations, and that's one of them. Santa Barbara has done such. I don't know exactly the extent. I shouldn't speak to that, but they've done something with microgrids for the schools, and I don't know if it goes so far. I don't think it actually goes so far as to incorporate school buses yet.
Right. Yeah.
So are you understanding my question? Did I say enough to make it make sense?
I think so. Yeah. There's so many limitations with public funds too. So it's really hard. I see what you're saying about the islanding. So one of the things, our goals is with our these funding plan funds and the clean transportation incentive funds, is we are trying to exactly today is to tell you, like, these are some of the different project elements in our various projects. And one of them is clean mobility in schools, which I was talking about earlier. And the way that we did set up that grant is to be very flexible, is in a lot of funding programs, public funding programs, if you're going to get infrastructure for a school bus, it's like a 1-for-1 type of deal, especially as they were pilots. You know, they're just starting to enter the market. We're really still just getting our feet wet, but hopefully not get electrocuted with electric school buses. And so with the clean mobility in schools pilot projects, we allowed for any kind of infrastructure. So it didn't have to be, you have to have a school bus in order for us to pay for the infrastructure. But we found that it really does come up to the agreements between the local utilities and CPUC and all those kinds of things. So it's definitely a great question, Beverly. And I don't think we're going to have the answers, and we're still working on this. So I really encourage you to email me, and we can make sure that we're all on the in tune to what programs we need to take part in to help influence and make it easier for school districts to be able to fund these kinds of innovative, slightly different, not quite, you know, what we've done in the past types of projects. So I'm just want to encourage you to keep joining us and talking to us and talking to the broader utilities and all the other agencies too. But yeah, we're not going to have the answer to that question. It's so complicated.
One more piece of it, could we set it up as a pilot program that would possibly enable it to wiggle around some of the limiting restrictions?
I'm certainly going to be making a note of your comments, and we'll definitely pursue what avenues we can see in the future.
Great. And where will I find your email? Your email?
Sure. Do you see my name on my Zoom?
No, I'm
You
on
don't
my
see-
phone, so it's
Oh,
it's limited
okay.
what I
Sure, no problem. I'll tell it to you.
drop that. Drop it in the
Oh, yeah, totally.
in the chat.
Totally do it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your help.
Sure, good luck.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. We have another question from, or a raised hand from Christopher Chavez. Christopher, you're free to unmute your line.
Yes, thank you again. Regarding the different equity mobility programs, do you have, or does CARB maintain a list of which programs are oversubscribed? I think it's important to remember that all these mobility programs have to pull from are in the same pool funding as Clean Cars for All. And as we know that part, big chunk of that funding goes to Clean Cars for All for obvious reasons. It's pretty expensive, a hefty program that had, in terms of providing, rebates for vouchers for cars. But I think it'd be helpful to see which programs in this mobility equity category are oversubscribed. I think that there's a lot of, oftentimes questions in the state legislature about where exactly are these programs serving, what sort of communities are they benefiting, as well as whether or not they have the resources needed to be fully optimal. So does CARB have any of that data?
I can answer that. It's a great question, Chris. And, there's a balance between how much information we provide in a workshop like this versus our public work groups. We do have that information and we can provide that in the next public work group. We'll compile that and let you know also beforehand. For all of our projects are oversubscribed. So that's the quick and easy answer. By how much, it kind of depends on how you view it. One of the analysis that the CMO administrator team did was who applied for the first window, the demographics of it, and who didn't apply, but who participated in technical assistance. And there's a variety of reasons why they didn't apply. And so we can provide the demand that we received in those solicitations in the CMO group, and then we can also provide additional information on the number of communities that participated in technical assistance but didn't end up applying. So yeah, a lot of information. We'll be sure to pull these comments together for our next work groups.
Great, I really appreciate that. I know some of the comments in the legislative budget committees have been a little concerning as far as saying like we're going to prioritize climate over air quality, or why are we funding equity programs, things like that. So I think that, certainly that there's going to be an extra need of showing how these programs are reaching and benefiting disadvantaged communities and communities that need assistance the most, and really how these programs do benefit both climate as well as air quality. And further the state's legislative goals, both in terms of maximizing co-benefits of these investments, as well as, again, serving those disadvantaged and low-income populations.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any raised hands. We have a question in the Q&A from Loretta Eard. Our transportation agency received a Caltrans Sustainable Communities grant to conduct a mobility study in remote rural areas of our county. Can we use the recommendations from that study to apply for implementation funding in CMO voucher pilot program number 2? Instead of having to apply for a needs assessment or step planning grant first, the Caltrans study will include heavy community involvement to development recommendations.
Take that. Although I think Loretta has already left the meeting, but I'm still trying to answer her question. Hopefully she will watch the video later on. So for the CMO program, Clean Mobility Voucher Pilot Program, we do require community transportation needs assessment. We do have a couple of criteria to meet a complete transportation needs assessment. I believe, you know, the study that Loretta you've mentioned probably will fulfill that requirement, but I will encourage you to review our implementation manual and see what those requirements are. Mainly, we need transportation access data analysis. That analysis intend to identify, you know, the travel behaviors, understanding the gaps. And the second piece is community engagement. So as long as your study meets these two main requirements of our needs assessment grant, yes, you do not need to apply for needs assessment in order to apply for implementation grant. And I believe I covered her two questions, unless Bree, you have more to add for STEP planning grants.
Do we have any other raised hands at this time?
No raised hands, no questions in the Q&A.
So I think since we have a little extra time before we break for lunch, I do want to open it up for comments and questions on all of the material we've covered so far in today's workshop. Just with the reminder, you know, we are going to be diving into the heavy duty investment strategy and heavy duty projects this afternoon. So if anyone has any questions or comments on anything we've discussed so far in this morning's session, feel free to raise your hand or drop a question or comment in the chat box.
Okay, we have a raised hand from Camille Williams. Camille, you're free to unmute your line.
Hi, and I've had to jump on and off, but this workshop, but I guess at the beginning of the workshop, you guys had a published timeline of events.
Yes.
Is there a way you can share that again and I can just screenshot it?
Yeah, Andrea, if you can scroll back to, I believe it's slide 9. No. Let me see here. It is slide 15. There you go. Perfect.
And also, Camille, I believe in the Q&A, we've had other folks ask for copies of the slides. We do have them posted on our webpage. And within the Q&A, there is a link to that. It's also the link that's at the bottom of the slide up on your screen. So we have the slides posted there, and then the recording for today's workshop will be posted there as well within the next 2 weeks.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
Do we have anything in the Q&A or any other raised hands?
Yes, we have a question in the Q&A from Lauren Dunlap. Does workforce training also include hydrogen fuel cell systems as opposed to 100% focus on BEV tech, i.e. is ZE really ZE or limited to battery and solar tech?
Ashley, do you want to take a stab?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question, Lauren. So when we talk about our workforce training and development investments as part of the funding plan, we kind of were talking about it in the context of light duty investments, but I just want to emphasize that we are looking across the spectrum for opportunities that might exist, including for heavy duty, which could include hydrogen as well. What's not eligible, just using an example of the Ideals of Workforce pilot project, would be fuel cell. but we are looking at hydrogen and other ZEB technologies as part of our investments. I hope that helps, and please reach out if you have additional questions.
Thanks, Ashley. Not seeing any raised hands or additional questions at this time.
All right, thank you, Sean, and thank you everyone for participating in the morning session. I think we're going to go ahead and start our break for lunch. We'll pick it back up at 12:30 to begin the heavy duty portion of today's workshop. We'll see you all back at 12:30. Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our afternoon session of today's workshop. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Jason Crow, to present our long-term heavy-duty investment strategy. Jason?
Thank you. As Grace mentioned, I'll be providing an overview of our long-term heavy-duty investment strategy here. CARB's heavy-duty investments are legislatively guided by Senate Bill 1204. SB 1204, or the California Clean Truck, Bus, and Off-Road Vehicle and Equipment Technology Program, was established in 2014. It calls for utilizing California climate investment funds for the development, demonstration, pre-commercial pilot, and early commercial deployment of eligible clean truck, bus, off-road vehicle, and equipment technologies. During the 2018 legislative session, SB 1403 was passed, which codified the heavy-duty investment strategy. CARB has developed guidance through our existing funding plan process to address the specific requirements of SB 1204 and SB 1403. For this next session of the workshop, I'll go over some of the priorities and drivers for our investments and the updates that we will be incorporating into the heavy-duty investment strategy this year. The heavy-duty investment strategy serves as CARB's long-term investment strategy for clean transportation incentives funding. It covers 3 years of funding and is updated annually. The strategy serves as a roadmap showing how state incentives can help spark private sector investment and create partnerships necessary to support the transformation of the heavy-duty and off-road sectors. It identifies key priority areas for investment that will help to ensure a smooth and continued transformation in the heavy-duty space. And it also includes an annual report on the current status of the state school bus fleet. CARB's investments support advanced technologies across the commercialization pathway, providing a way for the transformation of heavy-duty projects to help meet our air quality and climate goals. This graphic provides an example of how incentive funding has enabled that to happen. The Air Quality Improvement Program funds projects all the way from pre-commercial demonstrations through financing assistance for fleets. The Low Carbon Transportation Program also funds projects from early pre-commercial demonstration phase through pilots and early commercialization. HVIP and CORE play a key role providing a bridge between early commercial deployment and market scale adoption. Programs like the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust also fund broad purchase incentives and fleet turnover, as do Carl Moyer, AB 617, and Farmer. CARB uses a variety of metrics to track the progress of different vehicle and equipment technologies and vocations as they move through these incentive programs. Metrics developed for the heavy-duty investment strategy can be grouped into 3 broader categories: creating healthy communities, supporting technology evolution, and growing the green economy. This initial set of metrics is built on data from CARB's successful HVIP program, whose funding has helped to provide the deployment of more than 58% of vouchers in disadvantaged communities, support to small or public fleets at 63%, directly leading to or supporting nearly 12,000 jobs, more than 222 million cleaner vehicle miles traveled, and it has grown from just 4 manufacturers when the program started in 2010 to more than 43 manufacturers between both the CORE and HVIP programs, representing 197 different vehicle models today. And it also funded nearly 9,000 clean heavy-duty vehicles through over $500 million in clean transportation incentive funding. The success of CARB's heavy-duty programs builds on one of the primary guiding concepts directing the priorities in the heavy-duty investment strategy, which is the concept of beachheads. These are first success applications that provide a path for the transfer and extension of the technology to additional vehicle applications in subsequent markets. The initial applications in the beachhead are those that can make the best early use of a technology that can then extend to adjacent markets or applications that share similar powertrains, common components, and supply chain volumes. This example shows the zero emission pathway. Its success is centered on the first applications in the zero emission transit bus market and show how even with a relatively small initial volume, it formed the basis for a successful first marketplace and a stepping stone for additional uses of the same core technologies and architectures. Each year, the heavy-duty investment strategy document includes several core elements. This year's document will include an updated discussion of the beachhead strategy and how it helps to inform the extension of technologies to adjacent markets, updates on the current status of the advanced heavy-duty vehicle and equipment technologies, a further discussion of the market readiness indicators, additional ways to report on the metrics of success, new examples of what's happening in the industry by means of a series of mini case studies, and an updated 3-year set of recommendations for heavy-duty vehicle and off-road investments. The governor's fiscal year 2022-23 proposed budget builds on the multi-year investments that were included in the 2021 zero-emission vehicle acceleration package. This amount includes funding for key vehicle types such as zero-emission drayage trucks, zero-emission transit buses, and zero-emission school buses. The proposal provides significant support with over $900 million for the upcoming fiscal year and is part of a much larger multi-year investment package. The multi-year proposal envisions over $2 billion for CARB to support incentives for heavy-duty vehicles and off-road equipment, with additional funding to the California Energy Commission to support complementary infrastructure. CARB's heavy-duty investment strategy will continue to support progress towards meeting state climate and federal air quality targets, supporting the accelerated deployment of zero-emission technologies per the governor's executive order. CARB will continue to coordinate with CPCFA in the implementation of SB 372. SB 372 directs CARB to make financing tools and non-financial supports available to the operators of medium and heavy-duty vehicle fleets. We'll also look to identify emerging technologies and next-generation technologies that build on previous successes. The strategy will continue to report on and develop additional metrics that track progress made towards achieving the larger program goals, and it will continue to affirm and expand on ways to achieve our equity goals through CARB's investments in the heavy-duty vehicle and off-road sectors. This concludes this portion of the workshop on the heavy-duty investment strategy, and we can now open it up for questions and comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you joining by phone, please press pound or #2 to raise your hand. For those of you joining on a computer or mobile device, please press the raise hand button located either at the bottom of your screen or through whatever phone operating system you're using. We have, for those of you who would like to make a comment, have a comment or question, please use the question and answer box if you don't want to raise your hand. First up, we have Jamie Levin. Jamie, I have unmuted your mic.
Hey, thank you very much. Jamie Levin with the Center for Transportation and the Environment. And Jason, thanks for the presentation so far. It's remarkable how much CARB has made a difference in advancing zero emission technologies. And we are, of course, recipients of a number of your program funding to launch both transit and freight. But I wanted to throw out another idea that's somewhat different from what the traditional path has been for CARB. And it's related to the infrastructure bill that was adopted by under the current administration and by Congress. And I'm sure you're all aware of the Hydrogen Hub program, which is $9.5 billion, $8 billion for what will be called regional hubs. And it appears, based on the latest workshop with DOE, that they may be awarding, and none of this is absolutely certain yet, but upwards of 10 regional hub projects that could be scaled as much as $500 million to $1 billion of funding for each of these projects, with a requirement of 50% cost share. Their focus is on production and distribution, but offtake is a critical factor when we're looking at scaling up into the hundreds of tons of hydrogen production out of this hub program. We need to define and build offtake that can support that. Now, not all of the offtake is expected to be transportation. There are industrial applications, utility, grid, power to grid applications, but California is a lead in the transportation sector, and California absolutely has to be one of these hubs. And so to get to my point, what I think is going to be important is what can CARB and the state do to cost share this significant investment in upstream production and distribution with a large deployment of hundreds of vehicles that could utilize as offtake that production. And one last point I'll make to this is we do not have a huge pipeline for distribution of hydrogen. That exists in Texas and other states, but not so much in California. So distribution is going to have to be by trucks or vehicles. And what better way to transport that fuel, either as a liquid or gas, than using fuel cell electric trucks, which we will show have not just drayage, but regional and long haul capabilities. So I'll stop. I know I took some time there, but I think this is critical. What can the state of California do to cost share and match and be a recipient of what would be a $1 to $2 billion project here in the state? Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. I'll just say that I know this is a great opportunity, and we certainly want to leverage the funding that we have here in California. We're obviously going to keep coordinating with our partners at the Energy Commission and try to work and work with them through their programs. And certainly, I think we can demonstrate that California has invested a lot within this space already, and we have the vehicles that we're supporting as well. So we look forward to continuing this conversation with you and looking for ways that we can leverage these federal funds and make this happen.
And I think, Jason, our 30 truck fuel cell truck deployment out of the Port of Oakland is going to prove without doubt the technical readiness level of these trucks to be commercial. And so I can envision building 300-400 fleet of trucks or more that can then be off takers for 100-200 tons of hydrogen production here in the state. So I just want to open that thinking as it relates to the infrastructure funding that is an opportunity for California. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm going to take a question from the Q&A box from David Somers. Which programs, if any, support electrification of fleet yards with purchase and installing charging infrastructure? And is land purchase and environmental review, CEQA/NEPA, considered eligible costs in any of the programs for charging infrastructure?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for those questions. So I can say that our demonstration and pilot projects tend to be the only projects that include infrastructure costs as part of the overall project. Most of our other vehicle incentives are purely for the vehicles themselves. And so in most cases where we have vehicle projects, we look to coordinate and tie those with infrastructure incentives from programs like what the Energy Commission offers, and we try to help with that. As far as land acquisition and right-of-way costs, I'm probably not as familiar with their eligibility, but I know a lot of times costs that the fleet bears related to infrastructure can be used as part of the overall cost share, but that's certainly something to check out and get some further further clarification on.
Thank you, Jason. Next up, I'll move back to raised hands. We have Mark Roost. Mark, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. So Jason, what's the difference of focus between demonstration and pilot? What would, where would 3 trucks in with new BEV battery electric vehicle conversion kits fit between those two? And what kinds of resources, what level of resources are available for this?
Okay, that's a good question. Usually our demonstration projects are like 1 or 2 vehicle deployments, trying to demonstrate a new technology or a new application of an existing technology, whereas a pilot project is going to be a larger deployment of one of those technologies to show that it can operate at scale or over a longer period of time. A 3 vehicle project is probably closer to being a demonstration project, but in general, those projects are somewhat interchangeable depending on the project scope that's identified as part of the demonstration and pilot solicitation each year. And so that will be determined moving forward as we get into the implementation phase after the end of this year.
I haven't seen a lot of, well, the end of this year is after CARB's deadline, that at least what has been the deadline, I hope it isn't still, of the end of this year for the whole drayage fleet to be, that has, and every part of it that has 2009 and earlier engine model years is going to be banned from the ports starting January 1st. And there's been no concomitant, I'm looking at it, I'm estimating 8,000 trucks statewide. And I see no evidence absolutely of any kind of equal scale of support and of diving into all the different things that they need to deal with. I also see nothing about the difference between what a drayage fleet pays, or a small fleet, in Oakland, for instance, pays for trucks, which is $30,000 to $50,000 a piece, versus the amount that a second, like the second level, the regionals pay $100,000 or more. And if your incentives are based on that price instead of being based on the third level price of $30,000 to $50,000 and covering everything above that, then you've cut out the drayage fleet basically from being able to afford, because they're not making as much money as the over the road as the longer fleets are, the regional and longer. So I'll stop there for now, for a moment.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So I can tell you that conversions are an eligible category within our HVIP program, and HVIP does allow for some stacking of funds where cost is an issue, especially for some of these smaller owner operators. So there are some ways to make this work, and we can certainly dig more into the details with you offline if you'd like.
I would like to very much. So is that jason.crow@arb.ca?
Exactly.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Ed. Ed, I have unmuted your mic. Ed, you'll need to unmute on your end as well. Okay, I'm going to reach out to Ed and see if we can help him with some technical support. But next up, we have Parth. Parth, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, thanks a lot for the opportunity over here. Jason, when going through the slides, I saw the slide where we're talking about what the early stages of the incentive programs were to what we are projecting in the future as we go on. My major focus is on the off-road side of things. So I'm from ConMet. which has developed an eHub technology that powers TRUs using break regen as we go forward. And we have partnered with Carrier as well as working with Fiscal in testing these products out. My question is how much focus do we have on these conversion technologies for TRUs to become eTRUs? And I'm not talking about just putting an electric TRU, but an existing diesel one that uses, for example, shore power that can directly be connected into our system while it's on the road and effectively become an eTRU. So the question is, what's the focus on TRUs? And we find that there's a lot of mandating on the TRUs, a lot of regulations, but that funding around it, the incentive around it, is very hard to get to. So I just want to know the overall plan around here.
Okay, thanks for that question. We do know that off-road is becoming an increasingly important area for incentives. And so that was kind of how we started. We developed our core program, our clean off-road equipment program. And I know that does fund TRUs. I'm not as familiar with all the different types of TRUs and how that works, but we can certainly put you in touch with our core team to get some more information on what's available right now in terms of funding, what's eligible, and how all that would work.
And do we find that as we go forward, because TRU by itself is a pretty a relatively unregulated industry as compared to, let's say, trucks and so on and so forth. So what is the plan around TRUs in general? Is there an idea around there? I know CORE is the one that's going to be providing the incentives and the fundings, but how much more are we going to be focusing on TRUs?
I do know there is a team here at ACQIB that does look at regulations for TRUs, and so we could connect you with that group as well to kind of get a better sense of what the long-term plan is for any potential regulations versus what's in place right now. So I'm happy to coordinate that with you as well.
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, if you can just connect me to the right people around there, I think that'd be great.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Jason.
Sure.
Next up, we have Lauren Navarro. Lauren, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Navarro from Environmental Defense Fund. We're really looking forward to implementing SB 372 this year. It was something that we sponsored in the legislature last year. And so we're looking forward to your implementation of it this year and in years to come. As you go through this, we just wanted to say that we think it's important that you leverage private financing. That was one of the main goals of the bill. And one example of that we've had come up is providing performance guarantees for the trucks that helps both fleets invest, and it also helps investors know they can invest, right? So it can be something straightforward like that. Also directing 75% of the financing tools to underserved communities and Native American tribal lands. And lastly, other updates that need to be made. And just as you do that, keep in mind all the key stakeholders that need to be engaged in this process. So thank you, and definitely looking forward to working with you on this year. Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions as well in the Q&A box, and then we'll go back to hands raised. The first is from Dave Cook. I see there is 10 million for emerging technologies. Does it mean that none of the 600 million for clean trucks, buses, and off-road freight will be available for technology demonstrations?
I think that is to be determined. We do have, I will note that we have a work group meeting coming up on the 22nd, where we're going to go into more detail about individual heavy duty projects. So that has not all been decided yet, and that will be part of the ongoing process moving forward.
Great, thank you, Jason. I do have a rather long one here that's an overview by Furman Albach of his company. I'm going to not, Furman, I hope it's okay. I'm not going to read the full overview that you have, but I am going to jump straight to your questions. Your questions are about further elaboration on emerging opportunities, equity funding, and pilot projects in connection to the objectives of supply vehicle fleets for heavy tractors and light vehicle owners for products of, it's a new green technology, an apparatus that reduces to near zero carbon emissions from liquid cooled in internal combustion engines using gasoline and diesel. So, so low diesel. So in the light duty space, we are only funding zero emission technologies at this point and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. In the heavy duty space, though, when it comes to vehicles that are beyond ZEVs, Jason, can you cover the full swath of what we fund?
Sure, I'll give this a shot here. So most of our low carbon transportation funded projects are focused on more advanced technologies. So those do tend to be more zero emission technologies. We do sometimes have demonstration projects that are more expansive than that. We've had a few of those recently. We do have other funding programs here at ACQIB that might be more in line with what you're looking for. I'm thinking off the top of my head, the Farmer program, which does fund a number of different off-road, mostly agricultural equipment types of projects. And so there are a number of possibilities there. Again, most of our low carbon transportation projects in the heavy duty space are in the zero emission area, but we do have other funding programs within our larger portfolio that can capture what you're looking for.
And as you noted, you plan to email me with questions. Please feel free to do so, and we're happy to connect you with all the right staff. One other question here, and I think it might be, so we're on slide 53. I think it might be a little bit of a jump ahead, and so we'll be getting to the individual programs here very soon. But on slide 54, there's 75 million for drayage. Is that separate from the HVIP program? The answer is yes. Or is it a subset of HVIP, and would HVIP still be open to drayage in that case?
Yes, drayage is still an eligible project category within HVIP. The 75 million is just on top of the normal HVIP funding pot.
Yeah, again, we'll go more into the detail of how the programs break out within the heavy duty space in the coming presentation. Aria, hand it back to you for hands raised.
Thank you, Lisa. Next up, we have Beverly Deschaux. Beverly, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, thank you. By the way, I forgot to thank you last time for all the great work that you're doing. It's really quite wonderful, and we really appreciate it. What I wanted to talk with you about now is, Beverly Deschaux, I'm with the Electric Vehicle Association. We're a national organization, and our local chapter is the Central Coast of California chapter. We are right over the mountain from Silicon Valley, and so we have the good fortune of having the Silicon Valley engineers to consult with us about things such as transportation. And some of them are engineers who have developed Tesla and the autonomous vehicles with Google. So these are high-level engineers who are telling us what I'm going to tell you. And the city of Santa Cruz got some, what are they called? The natural gas buses, because we were told that out of the tailpipe, there wouldn't be emissions. And we were advised, not we, the city was advised by our local air district not to do it, because they knew what else was involved. So aside from the fact that they gave the city the funding anyway. They got a bunch of those buses. And while they're not stinky for the passengers and the neighbors, we know now that the natural gas has at least 11% leakage of methane along its production line, which has, depending on the scientists that you're talking to, 84 to 124 times the heating capacity of CO2. So I'm going to lunge into something different than that. I just wanted to give that as an example of that. I think it is imperative at this time in our climate crisis that we consider the entire system. And the entire system of hydrogen includes the use of natural gas for its production. 95% of hydrogen is produced by basically methane, by natural gas. And our Silicon Valley engineers have told us repeatedly that using hydrogen, aside from all of the problems with the exorbitant cost, is that it's like driving the vehicle twice in terms of the cost to the environment, the cost to actual fuel, instead of going directly to batteries, that you have to produce this fuel cell. And how it's produced is using natural gas for the most part. Yes, they're talking about green hydrogen. They're talking about it, but it's not really here yet. And according to one of our engineer consultants, it's been being talked about since he graduated 40 years ago. And he says that the technology hasn't moved that much forward. And yes, we can use the, what is it, the hydrolyzing, I forget the word, sorry. But anyway, so I would urge you, and I know I've mentioned this before to Mary, who I understand had a soft spot for hydrogen. And what she said at the time was that, no, we only consider what's actually from the fuel that's being used. So we're looking at no tailpipe emissions. But I would urge you to take a systemic view of the whole production and recognize that it is costing the environment twice what it would cost to drive the vehicle with just a fossil fuel. And we believe that hydrogen is the fossil fuel industry's way of staying in the game. So that is my impassioned statement about that. And I hope that you will consider that in whether you fund these enormously expensive projects to do with hydrogen, especially as it pertains to actual vehicles. We do have the battery capacity now for long distance. So, and it's being improved daily. So I thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Okay, we are out of time, unfortunately, for this portion, and I'm going to pass this back to Grace in just a second. We did notice that several more hands have popped up in the last minute or two. Please know we will get to you. We're going to go through the next presentation, and then so keep your hand up. We definitely want to hear your thoughts. Hang tight.
Great, thank you, Lisa and Jason. So now for our final session, I'm going to introduce Darren Nguyen, who will present the Advanced Technology Demonstration Projects, Andrea Morgan, who will discuss the HVIP program, Todd Sterling will cover the CORE program, and Eric Patton, who will be presenting on the Truck Loan Assistance Program. Darren?
Thanks, Grace. So as we discussed earlier, CARD funds a portfolio of incentives for heavy-duty trucks, buses, and off-road equipment throughout various stages of commercialization. We'll provide an update on low-carbon transportation projects, such as advanced technology demonstration projects, commercial deployment pilot projects, HVIP, and CORE, as well as the Truck Loan Assistance Program funded by ACQIB. We'll also share examples of how these programs have helped to bring emerging technologies into the commercial market, how they have benefited disadvantaged communities through reduced emissions and clean technology jobs, and what they are teaching us about scale up and technology transfer. This slide is a high-level overview of demonstration and pilot projects. Demonstration projects are intended to accelerate the introduction of advanced emission-reducing technologies that are on the verge of commercialization into the California marketplace. Pilot projects are intended to take technologies that are just entering the marketplace and deploy them in large numbers to assess functionality and ability to use the technology in its intended function. Results from pilot projects should inform other potential end users about the benefits of using the advanced technology to help the fleet transition to new technology. CARB has funded a wide array of vehicles and equipment with this program, which include everything from ocean-going vessels, tugboats, ferries, trains, zero-emission cargo handling equipment, trucks, buses, and the supporting infrastructure. And CARB has been consistent with a heavy focus on demo and pilot project funding for zero-emission technology in the freight movement. Since fiscal year 2014-2015, CARB has invested about $400 million in over 30 separate demonstration and pilot projects, representing nearly 350 zero-emission heavy-duty trucks, around 90 zero-emission transit buses, over 75 zero-emission yard trucks, and many more pieces of cargo handling equipment and vessel types, all with supporting infrastructure. We currently have 20 projects underway. 11 projects have been completed and 3 are pending grant agreement execution. Those 3 pending projects alone will deploy 150 zero-emission Class 8 trucks in drayage and regional haul service in South Coast and the San Joaquin Valley. And these are not included in any totals mentioned earlier. More than 99% of these funds support projects that are in disadvantaged communities, providing real benefits to these communities while showcasing feasibility of advanced technology vehicles and equipment. The current funding cycle for fiscal year 2021-2022 has started with our first work group meeting last month. We have $40 million in support to support 5 project categories. 1, municipal green zones. 2, modular powertrains for off-road equipment. 3, resilient and renewable infrastructure for commercial harbor craft. 4, add berth and add anchor emission reduction technologies for ocean-going vessels. And 5, zero-emission intrastate locomotives. Additionally, CARB will be soliciting for a third-party administrator to either run the green zones projects or all the demonstration and pilot project categories. Only eligible applicants can apply for funding. The third-party administrator is open to public, private, and nonprofits, while technical applications require either a public entity or eligible nonprofit to apply. Projects will be required to benefit disadvantaged communities, and match funding commitment is required for the applicant team. This is normally a 1-to-1 match ratio, but this can be discussed at the upcoming work group meeting. The public process to help develop this solicitation is underway with our first work group meeting held last month, and our next work group meeting will be in the April timeframe. And CARB staff are open to one-on-one meetings with interested stakeholders as well. For fiscal year 2022-2023 funding opportunities, there is a line item in the draft budget of $10 million for emerging opportunities. CARB is thinking that we could use these funds to take advantage of emerging opportunities that become available over the next year. We also hope that additional funding will be allocated to fund demonstration and pilot projects. If additional funding is made available for demo and pilot projects, we would like to pursue zero-emission projects for on- and off-road sectors that could include on-road trucks, large-scale port demonstrations, commercial harbor craft, and continue a push on zero-emission locomotives. As always, demonstration and pilot projects will continue to have a strong commitment to being in disadvantaged communities for most of the funds being allocated. If anyone is interested in helping to develop the project concepts for this funding cycle, please participate in our March 22nd work group meeting. Again, CARB staff are open for one-on-one meetings, so please reach out to CARB staff if you're interested.
The Hybrid and Zero Emission Truck Bus Voucher Incentive Project, more commonly known as HVIT, provides first come, first served funding for early commercial deployments of zero emission heavy duty vehicle technologies in California. Today, There are over 140 zero-emission truck makes and models from 35 manufacturers on the HVIP eligibility list. HVIP has provided approximately 9,200 vouchers, totaling $607 million since its launch. In recent years, we have seen a huge increase in demand, and as a result, HVIP has been at times forced to close after becoming oversubscribed. Last October, $63 million was requested within 9 minutes, showcasing the huge growth in demand for zero-emission technologies. Last year, our board recognized the success of HVIP and the huge demand for zero-emission technologies by approving a $569.5 million allocation for HVIP. While HVIP is currently closed to new voucher applications, it will reopen March 30th with about $430 million. When HVIP reopens, it will also include dedicated support for zero-emission drayage trucks, zero-emission transit buses, and zero-emission school buses, which were identified as key market segments in last year's budget. Additionally, this year we are launching a new pilot within HVIP known as the Innovative Small E-Fleets, which will open in late spring or early summer with $25 million of available funds. Innovative Small E-Fleets will pilot funding for incentives geared towards small trucking fleets and independent owner-operators, and can employ innovative mechanisms, including flexible leases, peer-to-peer truck sharing, truck as a service, assistance with infrastructure, individual owner planning assistance, and other mechanisms. We anticipate that the lessons learned from this pilot will help shape HVIP policy in the coming years. While HVIP is a first come, first served program, the majority of vouchers are being requested in disadvantaged communities, helping to meet the state's goals for investments. For fiscal year 22-23, CARB will continue to focus on supporting zero-emission heavy-duty vehicle purchases by small owner-operator fleets, especially in disadvantaged communities. CARB is attentive to advancing zero-emission technologies in underserved communities and developing equitable solutions. The governor's proposed budget again includes dedicated investments for key vehicle types, with $75 million proposed for zero-emission drayage trucks, $135 million proposed for zero-emission school buses, and $70 million proposed for zero-emission transit buses. And we anticipate continuing to offer set-asides for these vehicle classes through HVIP. This builds on the investments approved in last year's budget and will help accelerate the deployment of these key vehicle types. As we move through this year's funding plan process, we will continue to consider ways to modify our approach to better achieve program goals, and we will continue to look to HVIP's guiding principles to inform any policy changes. While HVIP has a number of guiding principles, and I won't list them all, a few that we will be keying in on this year include drive purchase decisions, maintain simplicity and a fleet-friendly process, avoid market disruptions caused by unpredictable funding availability, and support more equitable investments. We expect that the changes that were approved last November by our board, such as fleet size limits, will help support the goals outlined above. As we continue through the development of this year's funding plan, we will be closely monitoring the market and demand within HVIP to determine if modification to these fleet size limits or other changes to HVIP, such as reducing voucher amounts or adjusting incentive amounts based on fleet size, are needed. We will continue to discuss potential policy changes to HVIP in greater detail at upcoming work groups, including the March 22nd heavy duty work group and an HVIP specific work group in early May.
Thank you. The Clean Off-Road Voucher Incentive Project, or more commonly known as CORE, provides funding for early commercial deployment of zero-emission off-road freight technologies in California. CORE currently includes eligible equipment for 13 different manufacturers and over 49 models. The program has provided almost 500 vouchers totaling $71 million since its launch in February of 2020. Approximately 75% of the core funded equipment has been deployed in disadvantaged and low-income communities. CORE is expanding into other heavy-duty off-road vehicles and equipment, such as construction and agricultural equipment, in addition to landscaping equipment for small businesses or sole proprietors. The program is planning to relaunch in the summer of 2022 with $165 million budget.
CARB's Truck Loan Assistance Program was launched in 2009. The program utilizes ACQIB funds to help small business fleet owners affected by the EU's truck and bus regulation that fall below conventional lending criteria to secure financing for upgrading their fleets with newer trucks. Incremental recapture procedures have been implemented in the program by CARB and CPCFA since 2017. This mechanism redirects older contributions back to the program to support future enrollments and makes the program more self-sustaining by reinvesting funds from matured loans. Nearly 12 million in recaptured funds have been redeposited into the program account. Program demand currently remains steady with over 4,000 loans enrolled per year since 2018 and a loan enrollment of approximately 4,700 loans in calendar year 2021. As of February 9th, 2022, about 194 million in funding has been expended to provide over 2.4 billion in financing to small business truckers for approximately 35,700 loans. As 2023 approaches, the model year schedule and the truck and bus regulation will come to an end, and 2010 or newer engines will be required except for some exemptions. SB 372, signed into law in October 2021, requires CARB and CPCFA to offer financial and non-financial support for medium and heavy-duty vehicle owners to transition to zero-emission vehicles. Additional funding will be needed to support financing of zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles. With the governor's executive order moving towards the target of 100% of the fleet transitioning to zero-emission vehicles by 2045, everywhere feasible, and for all drayage trucks to be zero-emission by 2035, and with CARB's advanced clean trucks and upcoming advanced clean fleets regulations, California is quickly moving toward zero-emission vehicles. CARB staff is working with CPCFA to discuss with participating lenders ways the program could be improved to increase consideration of the financing of zero-emission heavy-duty trucks for small fleets. The governor's proposed budget envisions robust support for heavy-duty and off-road vehicle investments, with the proposed appropriation of over $918 million for these projects. This year, we are considering continuing to fund the existing projects we discussed, demonstration and pilot projects, HVIP, CORE, and the Truck Loan Assistance Program. We're also looking to continue key themes and focuses within these investments, ensuring that our incentives provide support to small fleets and owner-operators, undertaking measures to accelerate the deployment of these advanced technologies in disadvantaged communities, and using incentives to bolster the market in advance of regulatory deadlines. Some questions for stakeholders today. Are we focusing in on the right areas? Are there different projects or concepts we should support? While time to discuss today is limited, we do have a heavy-duty focused work group planned for next week on March 22nd to discuss specific details of projects and potential policy changes in greater detail. And with that, I will pass it on to Aria for questions or comments.
Thank you, Eric. As before, if you're dialing in by phone, please use the raised hand function by pressing pound or #2. If you're joining us via the web browser or a mobile device, please use the raise hand function or submit your question or comment in the Q&A box in Zoom. Please state your name and affiliation before asking a question or making a comment. And with that, Lisa?
Yeah, very quickly before we go to the list of hands, which there's quite a few, we did have a recurring question pop up in the Q&A during the presentations. And so to answer that question, folks asked if we could repeat the 5 project categories that the 40 million in demonstration and pilot project funding will support. And that list again is municipal green zones, modular powertrains for off-road equipment, resilient and renewable infrastructure for commercial harbor craft, at berth and at anchor emission reduction technologies for ocean-going vessels, and zero emission interstate locomotives. I will also respond in writing in the Q&A, but I wanted to make sure folks could hear that again. And if you have follow-up questions, the team can help. Aria?
Thank you. And I do want to preface that we have quite a few raised hands. So I see that your hand is raised. Just please be patient. First up, we have Adam Browning. Adam, I have unmuted your mic. Adam, you just lowered your hand. You will need to unmute yourself.
Apologies. That my hand raised was legacy from last go round, but you addressed it in the chat. So appreciate that. I would like to speak on the when you address drayage and HVIP, but it's not appropriate for right now. Thank you for calling.
Thank you, Adam. Next up, we have Matthew Schrapp. Matthew, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Thank you for putting this together here. I just had a couple quick questions, one left over from the previous presentation, specifically on the SB 372 efforts. Understanding that this perhaps more detailed meeting will be coming up on the 22nd, but wondering if CARB staff can just address a couple questions here. I'll start with this first one. For SB 372, where is that money coming from? Am I on mute still?
No, we can hear you. I'm sorry about that, Matt. It took me a minute to find my unmute button. So the SB 372 dollars, we have been authorized to use funds from existing funding sources, such as ACQIB and low carbon transportation. So that would likely be the funding source that our SB 372 efforts would come from.
Okay, great. And then I guess related to that, will that be at the expense of the truck loan assistance program then, as it currently exists?
Well, Matt, we have the funding for ACQIB going to truck loan. We're going to be talking more about it on the 22nd. Some of the strategies we use in truck loan we're probably used for SB 372. We'll be looking to get more feedback on that, on how that will be done.
Okay, I guess my question is just to be a little bit more specific, and thank you. I appreciate that, Eric. Specifically to if money's coming from ACQIB or low carbon transportation funds to fund SB 372, that's where money goes for the truck loan assistance program. And not sure if the idea is to just sunset the truck loan assistance program into SB 372. I guess one way to do that is just to not fund it. So twofold, I guess we'll hear more detail on the 22nd. about potential funding strategies, but as there's still tremendous need for the truck loan assistance program, will there be an opportunity to, I guess, continue that program in light of funds being allocated to the SB 372 concept, which is yet to be determined clearly. But so again, is the thought to sunset the existing truck loan program into SB 372, and if there's a timeline for that, or if that's more appropriate for the 22nd?
Yeah, we'll be discussing that on the 22nd. Those are options that we'll be out exploring and taking feedback from stakeholders to see how we might be able to do that. Yes.
Okay, well, great. Looking forward to the 22nd, but just, on SB 372, and as the CPCFA has been involved in the on-road load program since inception, my recommendation and in my experience is that possibly we would want something specific to SB 372 along the lines of a working group or something to that effect that would include our friends from EDF, as they were the bill sponsors, obviously. And to that point, my friend Lauren Navarro had brought up the need for, performance and reliability indicators or guaranteed performance. I think the only way to get to that is to involve the OEMs into that type of discussion. So having a specific work group for SB 372 would probably be helpful, to bring in lenders, to bring in OEMs, to bring in trucking associations and CPCFA to speak to program guidelines, as well as EDF, the program guidelines specifically to make this successful. I don't think it's necessary to reinvent the wheel, considering that the truck loan assistance program is probably the best, I guess, the best platform to build off of. I don't think that we need to, again, reinvent the wheel. So just a suggestion, and I'll probably bring this up on the 22nd as well, but would appreciate if CARB staff would consider doing something specific to that, and possibly even including the existing truck loan assistance program into that discussion. I think it'll be helpful as opposed to just lumping all this together here.
Thanks for the comment. Good suggestion.
Yeah, this is Jessica Johnson. Just to add on to the discussion here with Matt and Eric. Yeah, Matt, you make a good point. CPCFA is named in SB 372. So we've been working quite closely with them to build on our experience with the truck loan program and how that could morph into a program specifically for zero emission and moving forward in that space as required in SB 372. It's already, the CalCap program already has the built-in component of helping small fleets. So we know we're on the right track there in terms of how to help the fleets that need the most assistance to make that transition. So that is going to be part of the discussion we have on the 22nd, like Eric said, and we will have lots of further points for discussion and input along the way. So I'm glad you're thinking about it, and I'm glad you'll be part of the discussion. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate that, Jessica. And I think that there's an opportunity to possibly have a dual track with the truck loan assistance program in addition to SB 372, regardless if there's not additional funds being put towards the truck loan program to allow lenders to continue to enroll against their existing reserve pool, keeping in mind that there is a recapture component, I think is important, possibly coupled with more stringent minimum standards, as it's been moved up to 2010 engines at this point in time. Possibly a later model year engine component under the truck loan assistance program would be helpful, knowing that we're kind of talking about zero emissions and advanced technology here. Having those discussions outside of just CPCFA and including lenders specifically, since this technology really hasn't been lent on for small fleets especially, and then who would be able to participate in that. So it's a very good program, probably one of the most successful programs that ARB has run with the partner agencies. So it's encouraging to hear that using those existing considerations under the truck loan program will be looked at for SB 372. It's important that we recognize that again, we don't want to be reinventing the wheel here. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Next up, we have Nico. Nico, I have unmuted your mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Nico Welcome with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Thank you for this presentation and thank you for allowing feedback as well from stakeholders in this area. A few points, and I'll mix this item and the previous item a little bit together because there was some overlap there. The first one was about metrics of success. I noticed that I think in both presentations you made reference to it. It would be good to hear how many metrics of success you would like to see, or if it's more an effort of a path towards making sure that all potential efforts of metrics of success are covered, so that it becomes a little predictable and there's some kind of a standard. Because if we continue to have more and more metrics of success to assess what you are doing, it's going to be challenging to keep up with that and make sure that everything aligns. The second one was about, I've not heard this yet, alignment with CEC infrastructure funding. Maybe good to hear about how that aligns, just as a overarching comment. The third one is about codes and standards. I know that you've mentioned that you continue to support the acceleration of deployment, and in that realm, I think it's important to maybe make some reference to codes and standards development as well, because that's a good indicator of what industry thinks is important and what it thinks it's not all that important for specific technologies that you're covering. The fourth comment is related to HVIP, and I know you're going to get back to that in a March 22nd meeting, probably touches on that as well. But for HVIP, you need to qualify your vehicles, which is good because it allows for some level of provenness of the technology. But it may be interesting to consider as kind of a parallel to racing the 24 hours of Le Mans, that there is a experimental category where technologies that are not exactly prototypes are attempting to race for 24 hours, and that also helps with acceleration of deployment and technology for what you're trying to achieve. And it also may allow beachheads to move a little faster within the waves and the first rollout of technology. And then the last one is it'd be good to hear about if there's any alignment with DOE Super Truck Program or Vehicle Technologies Office, and how much you are able to interact with them with regards to where technology stands and what they're learning through funding truck manufacturers to develop new technology. So I'll leave it with that because there's obviously a lot more to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Nico. I was trying to jot down each of your questions, so I'm sorry if I miss a couple. As you noted, there were a number of parts. In respect to the metrics, we are trying to develop metrics that are consistent across our programs, but we also recognize that many of our programs have unique goals within them as they fit within the commercialization arc. So some common things that we're looking at in the heavy duty space that apply to all of our programs are just seeing the number of models and that are coming out and the number of manufacturers participating in the space. And that's a way for us to really assess how things are moving through the commercialization pipeline and just the proliferation of these zero emission technologies. But we also have the more common metrics that we use across all of our programs of looking at greenhouse gas emission reductions and emission reductions of criteria pollutants, as well as community benefits. So of course, we're looking at the deployments of vehicles in disadvantaged communities. And Jason could speak better to this than I can, but we have a number of other metrics really designed to look at just how our incentives are promoting healthy communities. Additionally, we're building out more metrics surrounding behavioral changes and looking at how incentives are actually impacting purchase decisions so that we can better align our incentive dollars so that they're used the most effectively as possible. With respect to the question on CEC and infrastructure, we are working very closely with our partners at CEC across all of our programs. If you know that these past 2 years, I guess, We have actually developed a joint demonstration and pilot project with CEC to roll out our first ever joint solicitation focused on drayage trucks, where CARB was supporting the vehicle technology and CEC was supporting the associated infrastructure. We're starting to roll that into our deployment incentive projects as well. So we have a great pairing between HVIP and the Energize program, which was referenced earlier today, but is the CEC's program that's really designed to help get more infrastructure out there. And we, especially as we deal with the set-asides within HVIP for zero-emission transit buses, school buses, and drayage trucks, we've really been interacting very closely with CEC to make sure that our incentives are aligned there. And I think you raised some great points on the need for codes and standards, and some of the interesting points as well on HVIP and qualifying vehicles. With respect to the DOE Super Truck program, that is something that I know that we have been following closely and have staff who've been really involved with as well. I can't speak to it as much today, but perhaps someone else on the line can, or we can follow up with you with more details on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nico. Next up, we have Jack Sivington. Jack, I've unmuted your mic. Jack, I see you trying to talk, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Jack Symington. I'm with the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. I wanted to ask a couple questions. One about the third-party administrator. Would that be for all 5 of the projects being administered by that third party?
So there are 2 options with that. We are open to having a third-party administrator administer all 5 of those options, or there is the option for the third-party or for folks to apply just to administer the municipal's green zones element of that proposal.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I would certainly, recommend breaking out maybe some of the third-party administrators based on the kind of core expertise of that administrator, as their municipal green zones are being quite different from, off-road heavy-duty infrastructure. And yeah, I certainly think that the municipal green zones is a great idea as a way to drive deployments of light-duty and medium-duty deliveries. A very useful stick to have on the municipality's part, and so CARB kind of funding that on the carrot end is very helpful. When it comes to the actual deployment, or the actual funding solicitation structure, are you imagining the administrator then funding specific projects, or maybe then working to provide block grants of sorts to specific municipalities to implement a project as they see fit?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And unfortunately, our expert on demonstration and pilot projects, Earl Landberg, who's really leading up this effort, couldn't be with us today. But I'd be happy to connect him with you, Jack, so that you can have a more detailed conversation about it, since I don't have those answers today.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm assuming there's going to be a work group at some point in the future on that, or I might have missed one.
Yeah, I believe we've had one work group already, and we're planning an additional work group to discuss in more details. But for questions in the interim, we can definitely get you connected with Earl.
Great, well, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea and Jack. Next up, we have Trishina Red. I have unmuted your mic. Trishina, we'll need you to unmute on your end as well.
Hi, my name is Trishina. I apologize for that. I'm on my phone and it actually touchscreen just touched this. by accident. I was just over here just taking notes down about what you guys were just discussing. I wasn't trying to ask the question. I'm trying to write my own notes down right now.
No worries. Thank you. I'll go ahead and remute you and lower your hand.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, we have Andy Schwartz. Andy, I have unmuted your mic.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Well, first, I want to provide a heartfelt thank you to ARB staff for all the work you're doing on these programs and also for providing this forum to solicit input and feedback. I did have a couple of items I'd like to discuss related to HVIP. So first is more of a comment rather than a question, and it regards the fleet size cap. We are very concerned about the categorical exclusion of large fleets from the program starting in 2023. Given what we see as a really important role that they play in driving scale and gaining experience with ZEVs, particularly in the early days of the transition to ZEVs in the medium and heavy duty space. These entities are generally able to tolerate greater technology risk, and also from our perspective may face fewer challenges when it comes to charging infrastructure, given the opportunity to invest in dedicated charging systems at, for example, depots. So because of these factors, we really see them as very critical early movers. So, again, we're just concerned about that categorical exclusion and hope there's an opportunity to revisit that in advance of 2023. Let me also just say on this point, I think we fully appreciate that HVIP funds shouldn't be used to purchase vehicles that are going to be deployed to meet a compliance obligation. And that seems, if I'm kind of reading between the lines, seem to be at least part of the rationale for the for excluding larger fleets because of the ACF, which obviously is under development. But as currently envisioned by staff, the ACF for some vehicle types or vehicle segments or customer segments won't come into force until 2030. And in general, we think HVIP can and should continue to support early action by larger fleets, as well as of purchases that are in excess of whatever compliance obligation an entity may face. So again, I don't know if this is a topic that is going to be discussed on the 22nd, but we do think it's really a critical issue that we hope can be revisited. Maybe I'll pause there and just see if there's any feedback or reaction from CARB staff, and then I have a question related to HVIP incentives.
Sure, thanks, Andy. So the fleet size limits that you're referencing, so just so that we're clear with everyone on the call, were approved by our board last November, and essentially required that starting January 1st, 2023, in order to be eligible for HVIP investments or incentives, fleets need to have 100 vehicles or fewer. And that would ratchet down even further in 2024 to 50 vehicles or fewer. So really what we see the primary purpose of these limits being is, as the technology continues to develop and becomes more and more common and accepted in the marketplace, and we've always envisioned our incentive programs as really narrowing to support the smaller fleets and owner operators who really need the greatest amount of assistance in order to get into these advanced technology vehicles. So this is twofold within HVIP and our guiding principles. It really speaks to the wanting to make sure that our investments are actually driving purchase decisions, as well as really wanting to support more equitable investments and making sure that the smaller fleets and individual owner operators have access to funds as well. So that's really the primary rationale. As you mentioned, we will be continuing to discuss this, and we can discuss the fleet size limits in more detail at our March 22nd work group. We are also planning to hold an additional HVIP focus work group in early May, noting that that would be after HVIP reopens on March 30th. So our plan there is really to be able to come back to you and all of the stakeholders and present some information on what happened at HVIP's opening, share some statistics of how things went, how the market continues to look as we move further down this process. And we'll continue to really closely watch HVIP demand and demand within the market as we prepare this funding plan to determine if additional changes are necessary to the fleet size limits or the HVIP program as a whole.
Yeah, Andre, that's helpful, and I appreciate that. I guess, one alternative to, a sort of a categorical exclusion, well, there are really a number of alternatives. I mean, one, if the primary concern is about smaller fleets getting crowded out, I mean, perhaps consideration of a set aside is in order that would guarantee some minimum amount of funding would go to smaller fleets while not excluding them from accessing the broader pool of funds as well, if that's insufficient, but maybe a set aside. And then, Tesla in comments, this will actually get to my second issue area, has supported the idea of, reducing the incentives available for larger fleets, recognizing some of the advantages they may have, but not taking what we see as a pretty draconian step of actually, categorically excluding them from the program, particularly when in many cases there will not be an ACF obligation to, result in those purchases. So, again, we just think that those fleets have an important role to play, and HVIP, is a pretty key incentive program for their actions.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to thank you for those comments.
And then, my second question relates to the incentive structure, and Tesla has submitted pretty expansive comments on this, but I am curious if reforms to the basic incentive structure are on the table. I think the current incentive structure, has contributed, frankly, to some of the oversubscription challenges that the program's seen, where, as you mentioned, tens of millions of dollars are getting subscribed in a matter of minutes. So, that's challenging from an investment planning standpoint. But also, I think sort of fundamentally, the funds as structured right now, or the incentives as structured now, could be more efficiently used if those incentive levels were tied explicitly to some of the underlying goals of the program. So, for example, calibrating the incentive that any vehicle is eligible to receive based on, some estimate of the emission reductions we anticipate, or, a proxy thereof, whether that's, a function of range or battery size or some other means. It does seem like the incentive structure right now is pretty crude and could be, tailored and tied to, the objectives of the program, which we think would, result in the program funding going much further and also in a much more targeted way. So just food for thought, and just curious again if how the incentives are structured is something that's sort of on the table for the 2022-2023 funding plan.
Yeah, so that is a great question, and we're always open to feedback on how we can structure incentives overall better, if we should be taking a completely different approach. I'll note that I think a few of the suggestions that you've provided kind of mirror how other incentive programs within CARB's portfolio work. Like if you look at the Carl Moyer program, that takes a really approach that's really focused on ensuring that you're achieving cost-effective emission reductions, and consider what the emission reductions are when actually determining how much funding should go to any individual project or vehicle turnover. So it is something that we can discuss further. I do want to talk a little bit about your comments about HVIP being oversubscribed and the broader concern of if that's a problem with the model that we have currently. And just acknowledge that the past couple of years have really been very unusual years for HVIP. HVIP first ran out of funding in November of 2019 and was forced to close and form a waiting list. And in response to that, we did actually propose and have approved by our board a number of different policy changes to really help manage demand within the program. And that included things like reducing incentive amounts and stating limits to the number of vouchers a fleet can receive within a calendar year, and things of that manner. And then unfortunately, in fiscal year 2020, there was very limited funding available for HVIP. So we had this unusual pattern of a couple of years where HVIP really didn't receive much funding. And so when it reopened again last year, we were reopening with a really limited budget and about 18 months or so of pent up demand. So we're really optimistic that this year things will shape out a little bit differently within HVIP because we have the most robust budget we have ever seen for the HVIP program. And we think that a number of the policy changes that we put into effect in previous years will also help with demand. So we're optimistic that funds will last longer throughout the year, if not the entire year this year. And then again, some of the other policy changes that we're looking at and have coming in the future, such as the fleet size limit, will also act as a mechanism to help manage demand within the program.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Andrea and team. We are about at time to close things up. But before we do that, I do want to recognize, we do see that there is a long list of hands still. We can't go past 2 p.m. today, as that is kind of the set close time. And for folks that have made plans to leave at 2, we want to make sure that we're respectful of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take, there's a couple clarifying questions in the Q&A that I'd like to just get those addressed very quickly. And then we're going to cut over to Grace to wrap up the rest of the presentation, which is very short. And then we will come back to those of you that have hands raised and get through as many as we can before 2. So that said, clarifying question, demos and pilot programs, are those from Liz Albertson, are those available or eligible lease and rental programs? Are lease and rental programs eligible for demos and pilots?
So lease and rental programs, the best fit for them within our heavy duty portfolio will be within the innovative small e-fleets pilot, which is actually housed within HVIP. And so we expect that a pilot will be launching at some point in the late spring, early summer. So stay tuned for additional information there.
Thank you. And then a couple of questions, both again from Liz Albertson and Alvin Chu. Related to HVIP and hearing about another 24-hour wait window and a lottery, can we expand upon when it opens? If it gets oversubscribed quickly, how things will be handled?
Yes, so HVIP will reopen on March 30th in the morning. There's additional information available on the HVIP website, which is californiahvip.org. It is a first come, first served program. However, recognizing the incredible demand that we saw last year, we have put in some contingency measures in place to ensure that in the event that the program runs out of funds incredibly quickly. So what that will look like is if the program runs out of funds within the first 24 hours, we will use a randomization process to determine who receives funding. An important note here is that any vehicles any vouchers that are requested for vehicles that will be deployed in disadvantaged communities will receive priority during the randomization process. So again, this randomization process would only take effect if HVIP or one of the pots within HVIP, one of the set-asides, runs out of funding within the first 24 hours of the program reopening.
Thanks, Andrea. Okay, Grace, let's pick things up.
Great, thank you, Lisa, and thank you to Darren, Andrea, Todd, and Eric. And thank you all to our participants for all your comments on today's conversation. I'm just going to do a quick wrap up and go over some next steps. So as a reminder, this is the beginning of our public process for the development of the fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan for clean transportation incentives. And again, over the next several months, we're going to continue hosting work groups on each of these projects we discussed today. At these work groups, we will continue discussions on how the money from the governor's proposed budget should be split between projects, and also continue the discussions of many of the policy changes under consideration that were mentioned today. On July 21st, we will host our second workshop, and before this workshop, we will release our draft funding plan, which will include our preliminary recommendations for the final funding plan. And the draft funding plan will serve as a guide for the conversations we will have at the July 21st workshop. We expect to release the proposed funding plan in October with board consideration in November. Again, as a reminder, these dates are tentative and they may change, so be sure to keep an eye out for GovDelivery emails and check our website for updates, and you can always check in with me or any of the staff as well. And again, I'd like to reiterate that our doors are always open and we're always happy to meet outside of our formal funding plan development schedule. So please, please, please reach out to us at any time. Thank you. And with that, here's our contact information. If you have any remaining questions, it looks like we have a few more minutes to address some remaining hands that are raised. But again, feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to continue to be involved in the public process around the funding plan. I encourage you to subscribe to our GovDelivery email service, and that link is provided on this slide. So thank you everyone for participating today. Lisa?
Okay, so we do have quite a few comments within the comment box. One more quick clarifying question, then I hand it back to Aria to go back through the list. I know we've got a few there that have been waiting a while. Last clarifying question, Dave Cook, how much in demonstration and pilot funding for off-road equipment can be expected from the GGRF 600 million?
That is a great question, Dave, and something that we are looking for stakeholder feedback on. And as has been mentioned earlier, we are planning to have additional conversations next Tuesday on March 22nd about the allocations and some of our heavy duty projects in greater detail. So we certainly hope that you engage with us during those conversations and let us know about how much of that funding you think should be put towards heavy duty demonstration and pilot projects and off-road funding and everything else within our categories.
Thank you, Andrea. I'll go back to raised hands. Next up, we have Bill McGavern. Bill, I have unmuted your mic.
Hey, thanks very much. Bill McGavern with Coalition for Clean Air. Happy to get in under the wire before 2, so I'll keep this brief. We have prioritized the investments in heavy duty and off-road because that's where we get the biggest reductions in the toxic diesel exhaust, which is the biggest source of air pollution in California. And we also think it's a good idea to prioritize those sectors that are facing tighter regulatory standards because the incentives complement the standards well. So that means trucks, commercial harbor craft, small off-road engines, and ocean-going vessels are all important areas to prioritize. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next up, we have Greg Bombard. Greg, I have unmuted your mic. Greg, you'll need to unmute on your end.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, good afternoon. And what we did is when we saw we were running out of time, we went ahead and put our questions in to the comment area. So we'll move in that direction instead of going through this whole thing and give extra time for other people. But we're looking forward to seeing ferry services like we operate to Catalina Island submitted into the Clean Transportation Incentive Program as we operate 8 high-speed ferries to Catalina Island. We're the lifeline link of service to the island. 4,000 people live there that rely on us on a daily basis. And we're not able to take the existing vessels and upgrade them to the Tier 4 compliance. So we will have to build all new vessels when this new regulation comes into play. And we understand that's going to happen approximately on March 24th. So I'll look forward to the staff being able to read those comments and understand where we're trying to get to here. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Teresa Bui. Teresa, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you so much. Hi, this is Teresa with the environmental nonprofit Pacific Environment. Just wanted to echo comments made by Bill McGavern and supporting the inclusion of Harborcraft in the core project eligible projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mike Thompson. Mike, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, thanks. I'll also keep it brief. Just wanted to kind of reiterate Andy at Tesla's comments on our concerns around the fleet cap. We would agree with their position there, as well as making the incentive amounts a bit more sustainable, which if you're spreading it out and limiting the likelihood of it going to a lottery by giving more applicants the opportunity to get funding, it increases certainty of the funding in line with CARB's stated goals. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much. We are at 2 o'clock. So again, out of respect for those that have all planned to close down, we're going to have to say goodbye for today. We do want to thank everybody for your participation. We recognize we did not make it all the way through the list, and we apologize for that. But don't worry, there's lots more opportunities coming. Again, this is just the beginning. For those that have comments in the box that we did not get to as well, there were several. I apologize. But please bring those to the next workshop opportunities, or sorry, work group opportunities, and we'll do our best to make sure all of your questions are answered. And we look forward to our continued conversations with you in this upcoming year.
Great. Thank you, everyone.